Chapter 495. Even if it was a battle between cultivators, they would usually go through hundreds or even thousands of moves. Only when both parties were exhausted would the victor be decided. It was naturally the same for cultivators. Unless there was a gap in cultivation level, even Qin Shi, who was at the peak of divine transformation realm, could not take Yuhuan Tianzun's life in 2 or 3 moves. Why was Tiandu able to withstand Qin Shi's attacks repeatedly? It was because they had gathered the strength of everyone on the ship. Several thousand immortal cultivators above the gold core stage were using the cosmic stars formation as a medium to gather everyone in the formation. Everyone was bound together for good or ill, and everyone was bound together for good or ill. Let's give a simple example. If Qin Shi's attack was compared to a flood, then the people of Tiandu were a dam. The dam was eroded bit by the flood. When the dam could no longer withstand the impact of the flood, the entire dam would immediately collapse and completely disappear in the torrential flood. Then there was a problem. Tiandu had gathered everyone's strength, but they could only barely hold on for a while. How could this Tuobai, who was only at the middle stage of divine transformation realm, be able to withstand Qin Shi's sword attack without suffering any injuries? How could there be nothing fishy about it? Qin Shi immediately understood why Tuobai could withstand his sword attack. The reason was very simple. Because there was an expert helping him in secret. The folding fan was Taoist Master Chongshu's natal magic treasure. Taoist Master Chongshu himself was a supreme existence. He could freely travel through the void like Qin Shi. Because he had been hiding in the void and was not in the main plane, even Qin Shi could not discover his existence immediately. Taoist Master Chongshu? After hearing Tuobai's words, Qin Shi could not help but frown slightly and asked coldly, "You are not a member of Tuoba family?" Hearing this, Taoist Master Chongshu chuckled. The smile on his face was just like the spring breeze, which formed a sharp contrast with the indifference on Qin Shi's face. "My name is Master Chongshu. I am the sect master of Jade Clear Grotto Heaven." Jade Clear Grotto Heaven? Qin Shi had long heard of this name from Chenghua. Therefore, after hearing the old man's self-introduction, Qin Shi immediately understood everything. Jade Clear Grotto Heaven should be the strongest force in the Supreme Palace enclosure, right? With the current strength of the Tuoba family, even with the addition of Tiandu, they simply could not withstand the fury of Qin Shi. Tuobai was very smart, but he was also very greedy.
Just like Tobagoe.
This was human nature. The moment Tuobai received the news, he began to repeatedly weigh the gains and losses. As he thought about it, he finally couldn't resist the temptation and made the same choice as Tobagoe. Benefits always coexist with risks. If the ownership of Tiandu was viewed as a benefit, then Qin Shi was the greatest risk. Just like doing business, in order to ensure that the Tuoba family would not go for wool and come back shorn, Tuobai made up his mind and took the initiative to find immortal Chongshu, hoping to share the risk of the Tuoba family and obtain benefits in a more secure way. One had to know that immortal cultivators were all people who would not rise early without benefits. Therefore, although Reverend Chongshu appeared to be kind and harmless, he might have secretly done a lot of atrocious and inhumane things. Jade Clear Grotto Heaven? Why did immortal Chongshu come here? Wasn't it because he wanted to get a share of the profits? Therefore, Qin Shi was too lazy to talk nonsense with him. With a clench of his right hand, the divine sword Dharma idol appeared in his hand again. "Get out of the way. Since you and I are at the same level, you should know that you can't stop me. It's not easy for me to kill you, but killing him is like killing a chicken." Before his voice fell, Qin Shi turned into a stream of light and disappeared in front of immortal Chongshu. At this time, Tuobai on the side did not even have any reaction. The divine sword Dharma idol suddenly appeared from the void and then slashed down at him. Didn't Tuobai feel very proud of taking Qin Shi's sword head-on just now? Therefore, Qin Shi wanted to see if Tuobai could still be proud now.
Chi.
A cold light flashed, and Tuobai suddenly opened his eyes wide with an expression of disbelief on his face. He never thought that Qin Shi actually attacked him so abruptly in front of Taoist Master Void Pierce. This sword strike was simply too fast. It was like teleportation. With the flash of the sword light, an extremely fine wound appeared between Tuoba Ye's eyebrows. And this was obviously the true power of the Moonlight Sword technique. The first move of the Moonlight Sword technique, a sword hiding in the void. Yu. This sudden turn of events caused Taoist Master Void Pierce to be stunned on the spot. Everyone was at the insightful Void Realm. Who could be faster than the other? Therefore, in the situation where Chen Shi had the upper hand, Immortal Chengxiu had no time to rescue him. Arrogant to the extreme. I'm so angry. Reverend Chengxiu let out a long whistle. The folding fan in his hand suddenly flew out like a sharp flying disc, following closely behind Chen Shi. Seeing this, Chen Shi smiled coldly and escaped into the void again. Insightful emptiness. Insight into the void, traversing freely. From the beginning to the end, Chen Shi had no intention of fighting with Immortal Chengxiu. Did he really think that he could scare him by using an insightful emptiness? What a joke. Everyone was at the insightful emptiness, who could do anything to who. Chen Shi couldn't kill Immortal Chengxiu, just like how Immortal Chengxiu couldn't kill him. But although Chen Shi could not do anything to Reverend Chengxiu, he could completely abandon Reverend Chengxiu and turn his attention to Heavenly Venerable Yu Huan and the rest. Therefore, after Immortal Chengxiu made his move, Chen Shi didn't pay attention to him at all. Instead, he went near Xingcha again and continued his forceful demolition. Peng!
Peng!
Peng! Chen Shi flew in front with his long sword, while Immortal Chengxiu chased behind with his fan. The two of them started a game of you chase me around Xingcha. However, the long sword in Chen Shi's hand didn't stop for a moment. As he continued to attack, the casualties of Tiandu also increased. In the end, almost no gold core realm cultivator could still stand on the ship. It's over. The Great Formation is about to break. Quickly support. As the saying goes, no egg can remain intact when the nest is overturned. Seeing that the situation was so critical, several celestial venerables no longer cared about preserving their strength. They had to jump into the eye of the formation and forcibly prolong the life of the tottering heavenly cycle star formation. But at this moment, Tobagawe, who had been steering the ship, suddenly exclaimed, "Venerable, we have arrived at Supreme Palace Enclosure." Hearing this, Yuhuan Tianzuan immediately came to his side. After looking down at the land below, Yuhuan Tianzuan's eyes flashed with a trace of sternness, and he ordered coldly, "Continue flying, don't stop."
Ah?
Tobagawe seemed to not understand what he meant. Continue flying? Fly to where? They had already arrived at Supreme Palace Enclosure. Why didn't they scatter and flee? Anyway, no matter how strong Chen Shi was, he was only one person. As long as everyone ran separately, could he really catch them one by one? Seeing this, Yuhuan Tianzuan didn't have the slightest intention of explaining. Instead, he seemed to suddenly think of something and suddenly asked, "Where is Jade Clear Grotto Heaven?" "In Central State, then go to Central State, quick." Chapter 496. The Middle State was located in the middle of the Supreme Palace Enclosure. There were many mountains in the territory, and one of them was the most well-known, the Heavenly Yu Mountain. The Heavenly Yu Mountain stretched for hundreds of miles. There were many rivers at the foot of the mountain and many cliffs at the top. It could be said that the mountain was high, and the river was dangerous. In addition, the mountain was shrouded in clouds all year round. The spiritual energy in the mountain was far superior to the outside world. Therefore, it was also called the first paradise of the Supreme Palace Enclosure. The name of the Jade Clear Paradise came from this. On this day, many disciples of the Jade Clear Paradise were carrying out their daily cultivation in the square. Suddenly, a dilapidated large Xingcha appeared in the clouds of the distant mountain. The disciples looked up and saw that the Xingcha seemed to have entered an uninhabited land. After breaking through the mountain gate's formation, it directly landed in the square.
Boom.
With a loud sound, the dilapidated Xingcha finally completed its final mission and turned into a pile of debris in the martial arts practice field. "Who is it? Who dares to break into the jade clear paradise and destroy our mountain gate? Disciples, listen to my order. Take them down. Under the command of the elder of imparting arts, all the disciples stepped forward, ready to capture all the people on the ship. But at this moment, a few loud sounds suddenly came from afar. At the same time, it was accompanied by an extremely strong wave of true essence. The strength of the two sides was so strong that even Elder Chuan, who had already stepped into the Yuanying realm, could not help but be frightened to the point of losing his sense of propriety. He did not even have time to order the disciples to immediately return to the main hall. A sword light suddenly fell from the sky and directly hit the wreckage of the Xingcha in the middle of the martial arts practice field.
Bang!
At that moment, Elder Chuan's eyes widened and his eyes were about to burst. However, he could only watch helplessly as a burst of powerful true essence suddenly erupted on the martial arts practice field. It was like throwing a grenade in the middle of a busy street. The shockwaves from the explosion immediately shook all the disciples and made them vomit blood. Everyone was instantly sent flying dozens of meters away. Elder Chuan stared blankly at the center of the martial arts practice field. He saw a large formation slowly rising from the wreckage of the Xingcha. It seemed to be defending against external attacks. What was going on? This sudden turn of events caused Elder Gong Chuan to lose his composure. At this moment, a loud and resounding bell sound came from the jade clear grotto heaven. It was a warning bell. It meant that there was an enemy attack. The moment the bell rang, 3 figures flew out of jade clear grotto heaven. After a short meeting, the 3 of them turned into streams of light and completely disappeared from the technique imparting elder's sight. This is Tongxian, Nanhua, and Dongling? Elder technique imparting elder was completely stunned. Profound enlightening, Nanhua, Dongling. If a void-pierced stage expert was included, then the 4 great reverends of the jade clear heavenly grotto heaven would be gathered. The 3 ancestors had been in seclusion for many years and had long stopped caring about worldly affairs. His sudden appearance today meant that the jade clear grotto heaven was about to face a great calamity. Thinking of this, Elder Gong Chuan suddenly felt a chill in his heart. Therefore, he no longer cared about Xingcha's remains in the middle of the drill ground. Instead, he led the group of disciples and quickly returned to the main hall. Was it Yuhuan Tianzuan and his group on the Xingcha ship that suddenly fell into the jade clear grotto heaven? Under Chun Shi's continuous attacks, the damage to Tiandu was getting heavier and heavier. Seeing that the jade clear grotto heaven was right in front of him, Yuhuan Tianzuan gritted his teeth and ordered everyone to withdraw the grand formation to reduce the pressure that they had to bear. The result of doing so was obvious. After losing the protection of the grand formation, Xingcha, which was already badly damaged, was immediately shot down by Qin Shi and smashed into the drill ground of the jade clear grotto heaven. It finally stopped. Presumably, it would also stop here forever in the future. Venerable, this Xingcha has been destroyed. What should we do next? Tobague stood beside Yuhuan Tianzuan with a terrified expression. One should know that just now, he saw with his own eyes that Tuoba Yi was struck by Qin Shi's sword. With Tuoba Ye's mid-divine transformation realm cultivation base, it should be impossible for him to die so easily. However, with Qin Shi's cultivation base, this sword would at least cause irreparable damage to Tuoba Yi. Therefore, when he thought that Qin Shi didn't even give face to Taoist Master Void Pierce Stage and was determined to kill them today, Tobague was so scared that he almost couldn't stand still. If he had known that this matter would become so big, even if he was beaten to death, he would never take half a step into the heaven's pivot ruins. At this point, the third party, including Taoist Master Void Pierce Stage, had reached the point where they couldn't back down. Yuhuan Tianzuan wanted to run. Chun Shi wanted to chase after him. Taoist Master Void Pierce Stage wanted to stop him. If Yuhuan Tianzuan didn't run, Qin Shi would kill him. If Qin Shi didn't kill him, how could the heart demon oath be fulfilled? As the third party, if Taoist Master Void Pierce Stage couldn't stop Qin Shi, where should he put his old face? Due to the above reasons, Today's matter was destined to be difficult to resolve. After hearing Tobagoe's question, Yuhuan Tianzun didn't answer for a long time. His face was gloomy, and no one knew what he was thinking. Venerable. Venerable? Seeing that Yuhuan Tianzun didn't answer, Tobagoe had to be like an ant on a hot pan, anxiously pacing around the array. Losing Xingcha meant that they lost the ability to move. Although the array hadn't been broken yet, how long could it last? Were they really going to sit here and wait for death? Tobagoe was annoyed. If it weren't for the fear that Yuhuan Tianzun might suddenly turn hostile, he would have already fled. Just as Tobagoe was anxious, a dazzling light suddenly bloomed in the distant sky. Immediately afterward, 5 figures appeared out of thin air in the huge martial arts field. It was Chun Shi and the 4 Taoist masters. They saw. Chun Shi stood alone in the middle of the martial arts field, facing the remains of Xingcha. The 4 Taoist masters stood in the 4 corners of the martial arts field, trying to trap Chun Shi. Although Chun Shi was surrounded by the 4 Taoist masters, there was no panic on his face. Instead, there was a faint smile on his face. Like a hunter who was preparing to capture his prey from a trap, even if he was surrounded, Chun Shi's attention wasn't on the 4 Taoist masters at all. Instead, it was focused on Yuhuan Tianzun. Chun Shi and Yuhuan Tianzun looked at each other across the air. He didn't make any move. After the 4 Taoist masters looked at each other, they had to forcibly suppress the idea of striking first. One had to know that this was a battle between Taoist masters. Although they had the advantage in numbers, if they really started fighting, it would take a while for them to end the battle. If Chun Shi was determined to fight here, wouldn't the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven be destroyed because of this? At that time, where would they go to cry? The 4 Taoist masters had scruples in their hearts, so they didn't dare to take the initiative to provoke him. The scene suddenly calmed down. Chun Shi just looked at Yuhuan Tianzun quietly, without any emotional fluctuations in his eyes. If it was said that he was a bloodthirsty beast before, then he was now a bloodthirsty beast. Then, at this moment, Chun Shi was a quiet pool of water, so calm that there wasn't a single ripple. And under Chun Shi's gaze, Yuhuan Tianzun couldn't help but feel an inexplicable pressure in his heart. At that moment, Yuhuan Tianzun felt like a monkey in a cage. He finally understood. He understood why Chun Shi was smiling. So, he couldn't help but shake his head and laugh like Chun Shi. But that smile, it obviously looked a little forced. Some choices, once made, can never be turned back. I think you should understand now, right? Chun Shi was the first to speak, breaking the silence. Suddenly, a cool breeze blew from the mountain range in the distance, causing the branches to rustle and sway. It made the martial arts practice ground look especially cold and cheerless. The scene in front of them was really out of everyone's expectations. Why did the 4 Taoist masters move together? Wasn't it because they were worried that Chun Shi might wreak havoc in this pure land of inheritance? But the result? When Chun Shi really forced Yuhuan Tianzun into a desperate situation, he didn't seem to have any intention of immediately making a move. What was going on? Chapter 497. On the huge martial arts practice field, everyone was waiting for him. After Chun Shi broke the silence, a complicated expression appeared on Yuhuan Tianzun's face. No one knew what he was really thinking, and no one could understand his complicated feelings. Yuhuan Tianzun remained silent, as if he had no intention of responding. Seeing this, Chun Shi could not help but smile, and the divine sword Dharma idol appeared in his hand again. Still want to fight? Seeing Chun Shi take out his sword, the 4 perfected masters' expressions changed drastically. They immediately retreated to the direction of the main hall, afraid that the main hall would be destroyed by the battle. 2 Supremes and 2 peak soul formation cultivators. This was the true strength of the 4 perfected masters, and also the reason why the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven could dominate the Supreme Palace enclosure. Even so, they did not want to continue fighting. Because Chun Shi was a supreme being. As long as a cultivator reached the insightful emptiness realm, their survival ability would skyrocket. Unless they could accurately find the threads of law that Chun Shi controlled, the 4 perfected masters would not be able to stop Qin. The world was so big. Where could he not go? Qin was alone. Even if he turned the Supreme Palace enclosure upside down, it would have nothing to do with him. Since the 4 perfected masters were responsible for the inheritance of the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven, how could they allow this land of inheritance to be affected by the flames of war? Therefore, even though Taoist Master Void Pierce had been brushed off by Qin earlier, he had no choice but to restrain the thought of making a move at this moment. Instead, he persuaded Qin with kind words. Fellow Taoist, listen to this old man. I've never heard of a supreme being in the Dubhe ruins. Since you've appeared, it means that you should be the owner of the Dubhe ruins. Now, you've chased after this group of people for thousands of miles. There must be a reason for this. There must be a reason to kill them. This is a matter of the Dubhe ruins. The Jade Clear Grotto Heaven should not be involved, but now, this matter has already affected the Supreme Palace enclosure. Therefore, I can only represent the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven and be forced to talk to you. I only hope that fellow Taoist can understand. This is the Supreme Palace enclosure, not the Tian Shu ruins. Fellow Taoist, if you are willing to stop and make peace with my Supreme Palace enclosure, this old man is willing to be the middleman. I guarantee that I will give you a satisfactory answer. Okay? After a long talk, Taoist Master Chongshu also made his attitude very clear. It was true that he was plotting against Tiandu, but he wasn't willing to involve Jade Clear Grotto Heaven. So, as long as Qin was willing to sit down and talk, he might be able to come up with a solution that would satisfy everyone. However, after hearing this, Qin did not immediately respond. Instead, he looked at Yuhuan Tianzuan with a playful expression and said slowly in a very calm tone, Yuhuan, do you know what your biggest problem is? That means he likes to act smart. To be honest, the existence of Tiandu means nothing to me. I remember that I once said that I would give you the appropriate treatment based on your performance. If you guys perform well, wouldn't I be less worried? At this point, Qin suddenly shook his head and continued in a sigh, What a pity, what a pity. You are too arrogant. This kind of arrogance has been deeply rooted in your bones. You are the master of Tiandu, so you can't tolerate being a prisoner at all. No matter how good the conditions I give you, as long as there is a chance, you will still choose to be my enemy. Am I right? Qin's voice came to an abrupt stop. He had said what he should say. There was no need to say what he shouldn't say. Why did he chase him all the way to the Supreme Palace enclosure? The Heart Demon Oath was only one of the reasons. In fact, Yuhuan Tianzuan's biggest mistake was actually, even if he guessed that Qin might care a lot about the mortals on Earth, he did not guess the weight of these mortals in Qin's heart. If Yuhuan Tianzuan had not delayed Qin in such a brutal way, perhaps Qin might have turned a blind eye and let Tiandu live. So, what if he was a celestial lord? In Qin's eyes, he was no different from an ordinary person. Although he had not returned to Earth and was unable to determine how much damage this disaster had caused to mankind. But as long as he thought about it, he could come up with a rough figure in his heart. This was definitely an astronomical figure. And compared to these innocent victims, what were the mere thousands of people in Tiandu? So, they must die. So, what if they escaped to the Supreme Palace enclosure? So, what if they found the 4 great spiritual masters? If I say I want to kill you, then I must kill you. This was Qin's attitude. The 4 great spiritual masters did not understand. However, Yuhuan Tianzuan suddenly understood. Remove the Great Formation. At that moment, he was like an old man on the verge of death, waving his hand dispiritedly to signal everyone to remove the Great Formation. Everyone could not help but look at each other, completely unable to understand what he meant. In this regard, Yuhuan Tianzuan did not explain much. Instead, he directly walked out of the protective range of the Great Formation in front of everyone present. Mr. Qin, Yuhuan Tianzuan paused for a moment, then suddenly lowered his head to Qin and said, This old man knows his mistake. Qin did not reply. Seeing this, Yuhuan Tianzuan could not help but reveal a bitter smile. This old man is the head of the 10 celestial sovereigns, Everything in Tiandu is decided by this old man alone. Today's matter is all because of this old man. This old man knows that his sins are grave, and does not dare to ask for Mister's forgiveness. I only hope that Mister can give these poor children a way out on account of the fact that my Tiandu has long since ceased to exist in name. As he spoke, Yuhuan Tianzuan turned his head to look at the remnants of the Tiandu battalion behind him. At this time, everyone finally understood what he wanted to do, so they all tried to dissuade him. Sky Sovereign, we are not afraid of him. Come back quickly. We can still hold on. At most, we'll just die in the bird's nest. What are we afraid of?
Right.
We're not afraid of him. For the prestige of the sacred ancestor. For the glory of Tiandu. These people in front of him were the last hope of Tiandu. Yuhuan Tianzuan silently looked at the crowd, but the corner of his mouth suddenly revealed a faint smile. Then he turned to look at Chen Shi. Didn't Chen Shi want him to give a reasonable explanation? Then try your best. Since things have come to this old man is only willing to use my blood to quell the anger in your heart. I only hope that Mister can let them live. Sigh. After a deep sigh, this Yuhuan Tianzuan, who had been in charge of Tiandu for hundreds of years, completely turned into a cloud of smoke and disappeared in front of everyone's eyes. However, even though Yuhuan Tianzuan had died on the spot, the sword in Chen Shi's hand still did not disappear. He looked at everything in front of him indifferently. It seemed that he was not very satisfied with this result. Seeing this, the remaining Empyreans couldn't help but look at each other. Then, as if they had made up their minds, they all walked out of the range of the Great Array. The successive deaths of the 10 Empyreans seemed to announce the end of the era that belonged to Tiandu. And with their fall, everything that happened today was destined to be recorded in the annals of history. On this day, Chen Shi alone, in the Supreme Palace enclosure's jade-clear grotto heaven, forced back the 4 great spiritual masters and forced the 10 Empyreans to their deaths. The Lord of the Sky's core. From this, his might shook the Supreme Palace enclosure. Chapter 498. After the death of the 10 Empyreans, Tobagwe naturally couldn't escape death. In this regard, Chen Shi's face didn't show much emotion. As if he was looking at a very ordinary thing, after taking a deep look at the hundreds of people left in Tiandu, the long sword in his hand turned into a wisp of smoke and dissipated in front of him. Since the culprits had all been killed, Chen Shi was too lazy to kill them all. It was just to give some face to the sacred ancestor, so that the inheritance of Tiandu would not be cut off because of this. Then, Chen Shi finally cast his gaze on Taoist Master Void Pierce again. He did not have a good impression of these 4 greedy old bastards. Thus, he hastily cupped his hands and bowed. Then he coldly said, "This matter is over. This Chen will not disturb you all any longer.
Goodbye."
As soon as his voice fell, without waiting for Taoist Master Void Pierce's reply, Chen Shi had turned into a stream of light and completely disappeared from jade-clear grotto heaven. Taoist cave spirit seemed to be a little dissatisfied with Chen Shi's arrogant attitude, so after a cold snort, he wanted to move forward to stop him. However, just as Taoist cave spirit was about to move, Taoist Master Void Pierce suddenly stopped him. "Junior brother, don't act rashly. This person's cultivation is almost the same as mine, and his grasp of the true meaning of the word void is quite proficient. Even if the 4 of us join forces, we don't have full confidence that we can stop him today. In that case, why would Jade Clear Grotto Heaven want to make such a strong enemy for no reason? Let him go. Today's matter is over. In addition, regarding the aftermath of Tiandu, everything will be handed over to Junior Brother Tong Xian to deal with. Junior Brother Cave Spirit, come with me. Senior Brother has something to say to you." Chen Shi left the Supreme Palace enclosure, just like that. He didn't even bother to think about any problems related to Tiandu, because everything that happened next had nothing to do with him. And the reason why he didn't kill Tiandu was actually because of this. The 4 Taoist masters seemed to have lost face, but in the end, they also got the benefits they wanted, namely, the remnants of Tiandu. Tiandu represented an era that was completely different from the Supreme Palace enclosure. The 4 spiritual masters could tolerate Chen Shi brushing away their face, but they absolutely could not tolerate Chen-Shi killing the remnants of the Tiandu division in front of them. If that was the case, wouldn't it mean that all their hard work today was in vain? Although the celestial sovereigns of the 10 directions had fallen, the sacred ancestor Taiching's inheritance had been passed down. This was the inheritance from the Dubhe ruins. How could the jade clear grotto heaven not be tempted? And this was the bottom line of the four sages. If Chen-Shi's bottom line was to kill all the culprits, then Yuhuan Tianzuan's bottom line was to let Tiandu's inheritance continue. All three parties had their own bottom lines. In the end, it was obvious that the final result could only be produced under the condition that these three bottom lines were not touched. Back to Chen-Shi. After leaving the Supreme Palace enclosure, Chen-Shi did not rush back to Earth immediately. Instead, he stayed near the Aote Nebula for a while. Everything that had happened before could be considered as a reminder to Chen-Shi. After losing the protection of the grand formation of sun, moon, and stars, the solar system had long been reduced to a vegetable market where everyone could enter and exit freely. Naturally, Chen-Shi was very dissatisfied with this. The universe was so big. If the Supreme Palace enclosure could appear today, who knew what kind of terrifying monster would appear tomorrow? The current Earth was still too weak and could not withstand such repeated torment. Therefore, the matter of reactivating the grand formation of sun, moon, and stars was imperative. Thinking of this, Chen-Shi took out the soul mirror and studied it carefully. However, this broken mirror had been in a sealed state ever since he forcefully brought out the remnant soul of his sister-in-law. Even if Chen-Shi used all kinds of methods, he could not successfully activate it. Helpless, Chen-Shi could only temporarily put aside the idea of reactivating the grand formation of sun, moon, and stars, and use his own method to build a barrier for the solar system. The Tai Ching divine ancestor used the grand formation of sun, moon, and stars to seal the entire solar system. Such a shocking move could not be done by a mere insightful emptiness realm cultivator. Therefore, Chen-Shi could only use a more clever method, and that was setting up one after another waymark in the Aote Nebula and finally connecting these waymarks together to serve as a warning. Although the waymarks could not prevent outsiders from entering like the Grand Formation, Chen-Shi could be informed of the news immediately and set off to check it out. Although this arrangement was a little strenuous and unrewarding, it played a certain defensive role. Presumably, today's incident would not happen again. Besides, judging from the commotion Chen-Shi had caused at the Supreme Palace enclosure earlier, even if someone wanted to sneak into the Tianshu ruins to investigate in the future, they would probably think twice before doing so. After all, there was a living paragon living inside. Because the Aote Nebula was simply too big, by the time Chen-Shi finished setting up the waymarks and successfully returned to Earth, nearly half a month had passed. This was the first time Chen-Shi had left without saying goodbye. The little girl clearly remembered what Chen-Shi had said to her before he left. Therefore, every day after school, she would sit in the courtyard with Big Cat in her arms and stare at the sky, constantly muttering when her father would come back. The April sun shone on the ground, causing the calm lake to sparkle. The willows on the shore of Hohai gently swayed their bodies, as if telling passers-by the beauty of summer. In the blink of an eye, that cute little girl back then, she was almost 7 years old now. 7 years old. Whenever a child reached this age and stayed in school for a period of time, there would inevitably be some new changes in their body. The words primary school student. In fact, it was a sign that she had already entered another important stage in her life. Because at this age, children would no longer be as ignorant as before. Instead, they would learn to think like adults. For example, Nian was now thinking about a very important question. Big Cat, I remember you could become bigger in the past. I was riding on top of you. Why can't you become bigger now? Hurry up and show me. As she spoke, Nian picked up Big Cat with both hands, lifted it in the air, and shook it left and right. In this regard, Big Cat rolled its eyes and pretended not to hear. One had to know that Qin Ruoying hadn't even returned home when the little guy rode the Big Cat. And as she grew older, Chen-Shi had already ordered Big Cat not to change back to its original form. After not seeing Big Cat for 2 or 3 years, the little girl's memory would inevitably be a little different. Therefore, she could not help but wonder if she remembered wrongly. With Big Cat's small body, how could it carry her? Girls develop earlier than boys. In addition, she would be 7 years old next month, so Nian height had already reached 2 meters. She had to buy an adult ticket to board the plane. But what about Big Cat? This guy was still the same as before, a little bigger than a fart, as if there was no change at all. Chapter 499. April in the Human World. Hundreds of flowers bloomed. Willow trees were graceful. Clear water conveyed love. Mountain ranges were covered in fragrances everywhere. It was a sunny afternoon, but faint thoughts were flowing slowly in this overflowing spring. Nian hugged Big Cat and sat quietly on a chair. However, her pair of beautiful big eyes looked around from time to time. She only hoped that in the blink of an eye, she would be able to see her father suddenly appear by her side. Perhaps she was already used to Qin not being at home for a long time, so after the little guy was in a daze in the courtyard for a while, he hugged Big Cat and ran out of the Chuehua gate. "Mom, I'm going to find Wenwen and Mingming to play." After saying that, without waiting for Qin Ruoying to reply, the little guy had already opened the gate. This was her daily schedule outside of school. Either the brothers came to her house to watch cartoons, or she went out to find the brothers to walk around outside. Every time at this time, Cheng Hua and Yi would follow behind her with a frown, looking at the 3 little guys running around Hohai. The way of the world now was not the same as before. In the past, no matter the age of the child, as long as they learned to run, they could play with the group. Their parents might come from the same brigade, or from the same courtyard. In short, no matter the age, the children would always naturally gather together. A group of people would run over, and a group of people would run over. At that time, there were no exquisite toys. Among the children, there would naturally be a child king. Then, under the lead of this child king, a group of people would go up the mountain to catch cicadas today and go into the water to catch fish tomorrow. Once the weather was bad, everyone would hide in the old factory to play hide and seek, play jump rope, and live a happy life. Such a pure childhood. Thinking about it, it was very beautiful. But it was a pity with the change of time, these forms of entertainment had basically bid farewell to the children's childhood. Instead, there were mobile phones, iPads, cartoons, and all kinds of exquisite toys. The times were progressing, but people's hearts were becoming more and more indifferent. In the past, as long as a child stood outside the door and shouted, even if the child was only 4 or 5 years old, the parents could let him go out to play without worry. What if they tried it now? Wouldn't their parents chase after them with a broom? It was rare to see parents who allowed their children to roam freely in the neighborhood. More and more children were restricted by their parents to a safe range that they could accept, which also led to the children having less and less contact with peers of the same age. There was an essay question called My Little Friends in Primary School Chinese. The frequency of this question appearing was second only to The Most Unforgettable Thing and My Parents. Who knew which little friend the children were thinking of when they were writing this essay? Luban number 7, or Arthur. The 3 little fellows strolled around Hohai. After seeing many people swimming in the water, they stood by the shore and eagerly watched. They had learned how to skate, but they had not learned how to swim yet. Therefore, after seeing so many people frolicking in the lake, the 3 little fellows were immediately moved. The water quality in Hohai is very good. Swimming in the wild here can be considered a custom of the old Shangjing people. Although the authorities clearly prohibited swimming in Hohai, it couldn't stop the enthusiasm of the local people. Once the weather warmed up, more and more people would sneak to Hohai to swim. Nian, I heard from the teacher that cats can swim. How about, let's throw Big Cat into the water and see if it can swim? Summer vacation was in 2 months. When school started in the second half of the year, the 3 of them would officially enter the 2nd grade. As they got older, the brothers came up with more and more bad ideas. One guessed that if she sneaked into the water, Gu Lao would drag her to the yard and beat her repeatedly when she got home. Therefore, she came up with the idea of the Big Cat. The old man strictly forbade them from swimming in the river, but he didn't say that Big Cat was not allowed to swim in the river. Therefore, after hearing Wenwen's suggestion, the little fellow was obviously moved. She had been to the sea, and she had also been to the water. However, the turbulent water was obviously different from the calm lake in front of her. And because she had seen the sea, the moment she heard Wenwen's suggestion, Nian Nian was slightly excited and said to the big cat, "Big cat, do you like swimming? Swimming is fun. I'll take you to swim, okay?" The big cat was lying lazily in her arms and taking a nap. The moment it heard the little fellow say that she was going to take it to swim, its feline instincts made its hair stand on end.
Meow.
The three children were standing by the lake, and there were steps under the river embankment. According to Nian Nian's idea, after letting the big cat swim in the water, they could stand here and take the big cat back. Therefore, she didn't even wait for the big cat to come back to its senses. As soon as she finished speaking, she suddenly let go and threw the big cat directly into the back of the lake. Meow. This time, the big cat was really panicking. As a cat, it was one thing to be able to swim, but it was another thing to be afraid of water. Therefore, the moment it was thrown out by Nian Nian, the big cat began to twist its body crazily in the air. It wanted to borrow strength, but it couldn't find any place to do so. It could only watch as it got closer and closer to the deep lake.
Meow.
With a shriek, its body suddenly expanded by 30% in the air. It was instinctive to be afraid of water. Driven by its instincts, it obviously didn't care about Qin Shi's constant warnings. Therefore, the moment the big cat was about to fall into the water, its body grew at least 2 to 3 times its original size. But at this moment, a ray of vital energy shot out from nowhere, and then it forced the big cat back into its domestic cat form.
Splash.
With the sound of falling into the water, the big cat seemed to have suffered a great grievance, and soaked in the water, it meowed miserably. "Nian Nian, look, I told you it could swim." Seeing that the big cat didn't sink into the water, the two brothers immediately shouted happily. However, when Nian Nian saw the big cat's pitiful appearance, she suddenly thought of something, so she quickly walked down the steps, then stood on the shore and waved at the big cat. "Big cat, come over quickly. The water is cold." As she spoke, Nian Nian reached her hand into the lake. The lake was indeed very cold. "Big cat, I'm sorry. The water is so cold. I shouldn't have thrown you into the water. Come, I'll hold you. This way you won't be cold, right?" After pulling the big cat out of the lake, Nian Nian began to apologize to the big cat. She completely ignored the big cat's wet body and directly hugged the big cat into her arms, trying to use her body to drive the cold away for the big cat. Seeing this, the two brothers couldn't laugh anymore. At this time, they finally realized that they were in the wrong, so they imitated Nian Nian, surrounded the big cat, and apologized with a heart full of guilt. Exploration and practice. This was a process that children had to go through in the process of growing up. Because of the immaturity of the mind, they would always do a lot of unreasonable things unintentionally. At this time, the effect of a parent's blind punishment was far less than the correct guidance. Even if Qin Shi wasn't by her side today, Nian Nian still quickly realized that she was in the wrong. What did this mean? It meant that she was really starting to grow up and gradually forming her own worldview. "You have such a cute and sensible daughter. Mr. Qin, you're so lucky. I'm so envious." Just as the three little guys were running in circles around the big cat, Qin Shi and Jiang Yan silently appeared not far behind them. In fact, Qin Shi had come back a long time ago. It was just that he saw that Nian Nian was having fun, so he didn't show up to disturb them. And the reason why Qin Shi didn't go home immediately was because, of course, it was because of Jiang Yan. After all, if Jiang Yan hadn't arrived in time, Heavenly Venerable Yu Huan might have been served with good food and drinks by the Tuoba family right now. Chapter 500. If Jiang Yan had not arrived in time, Yuhuan Tianzuan and his group would have successfully entered the space jump and reached the Supreme Palace enclosure as quickly as possible. Although Qin Shi could chase after Yuhuan Tianzuan to the Supreme Palace enclosure after dealing with the Tuoba family's men of sacrifice. But by that time, Tiandu's group might have already broken up into pieces and scattered in the Supreme Palace enclosure. Could Could Qinshi plow through the Supreme Palace enclosure and find everyone in Tiandu, even if he had to dig 3 feet into the ground? Even if Qinshi really had the leisure to do so, he did not have so much time to waste in the Supreme Palace enclosure. Therefore, it was obviously the best result to be able to catch the remnants of Tiandu before they scattered. Qinshi was very satisfied with this result. The matter of thanking Jiang Yan was naturally within reason. This was a catastrophe that affected the whole world and appeared almost everywhere at the same time. Although the disaster did not last long, it still brought huge losses to mankind, and the American continent suffered the most. This disaster was unanimously named by scientists all over the world Skyfire. It was said to be a supernatural phenomenon caused by a solar storm. As for the specific cause of Skyfire, scientists were still researching and had not yet given a rigorous and reasonable report. Skyfire swept across the world, but Huaxia was the least affected. Only the city of Zygaze and a few surrounding villages and towns were attacked by Skyfire. As Europe was too close to Asia, they were the first to receive support from Diu Island. Africa was poor and Australia was small. These places were sparsely populated and were not the first target of the Tuoba family. Therefore, the American continent, which was far away at the other end of the Pacific Ocean, naturally became the disaster area. Olmi had been through a lot in the past few years. First, there was the threat of the supervolcano, and then there was the trouble of Chenghua and Yiji. After a while of peace, Skyfire came again. Perhaps this was retribution. Olmi did not do bad things in Central Asia because of oil, which directly caused the local people to suffer the pain of war. After the Skyfire incident, Olmi could finally have some peace and quiet. Nowadays, the TV stations broadcast the disaster situations all day long. But for the viewers watching the TV, as long as the disaster did not befall them, wouldn't they still be eating and sleeping every day? Disaster relief? That was a matter for the country. At most, the commoners would chat with each other after a meal. Jiang Yan accepted Qinshi's thanks with a smile. In addition, he also brought a slightly surprising piece of news to Qinshi. That was, Diu Island had officially joined the Wu Lian. Because of this, Jiang Yan became one of the Wu Lian tycoons. His status was even higher than Qin Yongwang and Wang Chunju. All in all, Jiang Yan was much more sensible than Yuhuan Tianzuan. Ever since Jiang Yan had known Qinshi, this old guy had been sending gifts and running errands for him. The only thing he hadn't done was to enshrine Qinshi in the ancestral hall. As the saying goes, the older the wiser. Combining the information collected by the 9 serenities and the bits and pieces of information he heard from Qinshi, Jiang Yan immediately connected the dots and guessed most of it. Seeing that Qinshi had even taken care of Tiandu, if he still dared to jump around under Qinshi's nose, wouldn't he be tired of living? Therefore, Jiang Yan immediately changed the management strategy of the 9 serenities. Since he couldn't beat you, he might as well join you. After all, the 9 serenities was different from Tiandu. Jiang Yan didn't have as much self-esteem as Yuhuan Tianzuan, who didn't want to work with. Since there were benefits to following Qinshi, why would he waste time blindly thinking about it? In this regard, Qinshi didn't express any opinions. After all, he didn't own Wu Lian, and Jiang Yan wasn't his subordinate. Why should he worry so much? If he had the time, he might as well spend it playing with Nian. The days returned to normal. In the blink of an eye, the little girl was now 7 years old and had officially entered the 2nd grade of primary school. It had to be said that Nian was a child that didn't cause anyone to worry about her. As soon as Qinshi sent Nian to the classroom, the teacher came to find him alone. Nian's class teacher was surnamed Zhang. She was a woman in her 30s or 40s and looked very kind. Mr. Qin, it's like this. Qin Yan's academic results and her performance in all aspects are extremely outstanding in the entire grade. As her class teacher, I feel like I have an obligation to remind you. I wonder, have you ever considered letting Qin Yan skip a grade? Hearing this, Qinshi couldn't help but be stunned. Skip a grade? In fact, skipping a grade was actually a very common thing in primary school because the Department of Education also had clear regulations in this regard. According to the Department of Education's regulations, as long as the student's academic performance was particularly outstanding and reached the first grade in advance, the student or their parents could apply. After a comprehensive assessment by the school and a written report to the Higher Education Department for approval, the student could skip a grade. After all, everyone's IQ is different. There were always children whose IQ was far higher than their peers. She already knew calculus. Did she have to be locked in the classroom with her peers to calculate addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division? She had officially begun to teach Nian cultivation. Although he only taught Nian how to gather qi and didn't teach her any techniques after that. However, under the constant scouring of the spirit energy of heaven and earth, Nian's intelligence would inevitably increase by leaps and bounds. At this rate, it wouldn't be long before Nian wouldn't be able to play with the two brothers anymore, and this was also the fundamental reason why Qinshi had always been opposed to letting Nian cultivate. It felt like he was giving Nian a catalyst. It inevitably gave him a strange feeling. There was a saying, "Hope for your son to become a dragon and hope for your daughter to become a phoenix." Was Qinshi really different from those flirtatious B*****s? Did he really have to turn his daughter into a fool? How is that possible? At this point, Qinshi could only let nature take its course. Now that the homeroom teacher took the initiative to mention this point, it actually meant that Nian really wasn't suitable to continue staying in the second grade. The matter of skipping grades was something that had to be done. However, before this, Qinshi still had to ask the little girl for her opinion. After all, there were two sides to everything. Grades during the compulsory education period were secondary. Physical and mental health were the most important. Children in the lower grades were not mentally mature. Suddenly changing from a familiar environment to an unfamiliar environment and surrounded by children who were older than her naturally took a long time to adapt. Once the child couldn't adapt, the impact could be extremely bad or even irreversible. Therefore, after Qinshi and teacher Zhang had a detailed discussion, he called the little girl to the office. Nian, tell Daddy, do you want to skip a grade? Chapter 501. Skip a grade? The little girl blinked her eyes, as if she did not understand what Qinshi meant. Seeing this, Qinshi patiently explained to her. The teacher said that with your grades, you don't need to go to the second grade. You can go directly to the third grade and study with the third grade brothers and sisters. Nian, do you want to go? Hearing this, the little girl smiled proudly. Sure. The students in our class are too stupid. They can't even do such simple questions. I'm much smarter than them. I already know how to do the third grade questions. The little girl's grades were very good. It was inevitable that the teacher would take the initiative to give her special attention, so she had already done the third grade questions before. And this was also the reason why the teacher took the initiative to ask Qinshi to let Nian skip a grade. To Qinshi, grades were naturally secondary. A child's physical and mental health was the most important. Therefore, even if the little girl showed an eager look, Qinshi was still a little worried and reminded her, Nian, you have to think carefully. You're now a student of the second grade class. If you skip a grade, you'll be a student of the second grade class. Look, the second grade class is there. As he said this, Qinshi led the little girl to the window, then carried her and indicated to her to look at the classroom opposite. That was the second grade class. She did not know any of the classmates in the class. If she chose to skip a grade, then from today onwards, she would be a student of this class. For a child, it would be easier for them to understand if there was a real example. Therefore, when the little girl saw the unfamiliar faces in the classroom of the third grade class too, she immediately hesitated. She would be studying in that classroom in the future? The little girl stared at the classroom opposite. The expression on her little face was very serious. She did not immediately express her opinion. However, Qinshi saw the hesitation in her, so he immediately turned around and smiled at teacher Zhang. Was there a need to say this? Nian must be scared. Instead of forcing her into an unfamiliar environment, it was better to let her stay in the second grade class. At least it wouldn't bring too much psychological pressure to her. Qinshi's mind turned, and he suddenly made a decision. Zhang Laosher didn't have any objections to this. After all, she had seen too many situations like this. Basically, every year, a few children would face such a choice. There were pros and cons to skipping grades, so she was only responsible for making suggestions. The final decision was still in the hands of the parents. Thank you for your concern, Teacher Zhang. As you can see, this child doesn't seem to be very willing, so the matter of skipping grades, Qinshi turned around and thanked Teacher Zhang. But at this moment, the little fellow suddenly interrupted him. Dad, what are the benefits of skipping grades? After saying that, the little guy looked up at Qinshi, his eyes filled with curiosity. Benefits? There are many of them. Look, you have to study for a full 6 years in primary school. If you skip grades, you will study 1 year less than others. You will enter secondary school and even university earlier, taking 10,000 steps back. If your results aren't good in the future, you can even repeat a year more than others. No matter how you look at it, it's still a win. Of course, with your results, repeating a year is definitely impossible. Dad believes in you. Qinshi briefly explained the benefits of skipping grades to the little fellow and didn't forget to encourage her at the end. Hearing this, the little fellow put on a thoughtful expression. She already understood the benefits of skipping grades. As for the disadvantages of skipping grades, in fact, Qinshi didn't need to point it out. The little fellow could clearly feel it herself. Qinshi never forced the little fellow. So when he saw Nian hesitation, he immediately made a decision in his heart. However, Qinshi didn't notice. The little fellow had already learned how to read people's expressions. So even if he didn't express any attitude, the little fellow could keenly sense that her father still hoped that she would choose to skip grades. After all, for any parent, if their child could skip grades, it would be a great thing. Because this showed how outstanding their child was. Qinshi felt sorry for the little fellow, just like how the little fellow felt sorry for him. Nian didn't want to disappoint Qinshi. Therefore, after thinking about it seriously, she said to Qinshi with a determined face, Dad, I want to skip grades. This time, it was Qinshi's turn to be surprised. He thought that Nian didn't understand the pros and cons, so he immediately asked, Nian, do you really want to skip grades? Aren't you afraid? After skipping grades, you won't be in this class anymore. The students in class 2 of grade 3 are all 1 year older than you. Who knows, they might even gang up to bully you. As soon as this was said, a trace of embarrassment flashed across Teacher Zhang's face. If she didn't want to skip grades, then so be it. Who would scare a child like this? Furthermore, was their school the kind of third-rate school that would tolerate bullying? Teacher Zhang wanted to say something but stopped. Nian immediately replied, I'm not afraid. Although I'm younger than them, I'm smarter than them. Why should I be afraid? I'm also the class monitor of our class. I want to be the class monitor of grade 3 class 2 in the future. Also, no one in our class dares to bully me. I'll beat up whoever dares to bully me. At this point, Nian clenched her little fist and added proudly, This is what you taught me, Dad.
Did you forget, Dad?
Hearing this, Qinshi instantly felt awkward. After glancing at Teacher Zhang with some embarrassment, he hurriedly stopped the little fellow's bold words. Don't talk nonsense. Dad didn't teach you to hit people. Dad, you clearly said that before. When did I?
When?
The teacher is right next to us. Don't talk nonsense. I did. Dad is shameless. The father and daughter joked around for a while. When Teacher Zhang saw this, he didn't take it to heart. Instead, he went back to his seat and smiled as he handed a form to Qinshi. Mr. Qin, this is the child's grade skipping application form. Please fill it in accordingly. After filling it out, I'll submit it to the school for review. After the school's review is completed and the information is submitted to the Education Bureau, the child's school roll can be changed in about 7 working days. Of course, this is all part of the process. School starts today. If you don't have any other opinions, Nian can directly report to grade 3 class 2 with me. That's it? Qinshi took the form from the teacher with some hesitation. After all, he didn't know that the little fellow already had her own ideas. He only thought that the little fellow didn't understand the pros and cons of this and thought that it was a fun thing to do. Regarding this, the little fellow was exceptionally resolute. She wasn't afraid. Furthermore, she would perform better than before. She definitely wouldn't disappoint her father. Thinking about it, if Chinshi knew the little fellow's true thoughts, he would definitely be moved to tears by this considerate little jacket. Sorry, I've been sorting out the plot for the past 2 days, so the update is a little slow. Please forgive me. Chapter 502. The little girl's third-grade life began abruptly. According to the school's arrangements, today was the day that the new teaching materials were distributed. Hence, after the little girl returned to second-grade class 2 and picked up her backpack, she left the classroom that was supposed to belong to her under the watchful eyes of her classmates. At that moment, Chinshi saw a proud expression on the little girl's face. It had to be said that this child really made her father proud. Under the guidance of the teacher, Nian quickly arrived at the entrance of third-grade class 2. The form teacher of third-grade class 2 was also a middle-aged woman with the surname Li. She was slightly chubby and looked exceptionally amiable. It should be known that the form teachers of elementary schools were usually not changed easily. From the day the child entered school, the form teacher would always be by their side for the next 6 years until the child graduated. Hence, the moment teacher Li saw Nian, her face was so happy that flowers were about to bloom. Since this child could skip grades, it meant that she had huge potential. In Huaxia, the child's results were naturally the teacher's achievements. Wasn't this equivalent to her picking up a huge bargain? Teacher Li was so happy that she wanted to help Nian carry her backpack. But she didn't expect that. Her suggestion was politely rejected by the little girl. "Thank you, teacher. I'm a student. I should carry my own backpack." Seeing the little girl's obedient manner, Teacher Li was instantly delighted. "Io, this child is so sensible. You're called Chinyan, right? I like you." It was class time now, so after a simple exchange of words with Teacher Zhang, Teacher Li directly put her hand on the little girl's shoulder and walked her into third-grade class 2. The third-year students were basically all old foxes. After Teacher Li went out and was delayed for a while, the classroom suddenly became a little noisy. "Come, everyone, quiet down. Let me introduce you. This is our new classmate, Chan Nian. Everyone welcome." After saying that, Teacher Li took the lead in clapping her hands. In an instant, there was a burst of lively applause in the classroom. The little fellow stood nervously beside Teacher Li. Looking at the unfamiliar faces below the stage, she suddenly felt a burst of fear in her heart for no reason, so much so that her little face slightly tensed up. Chan Nian skipped a grade, so he should be 1 year younger than you. But her grades are very good, so she doesn't need to go to the second grade anymore. Now that she's in our class, she'll be the youngest student in our class. As Chen Nian's elder brother and sister, you should. Speaking up to this point, Teacher Li deliberately paused for a moment, then raised his hand to signal the students present to answer together. Seeing this, the students in the class were also quick-witted. Even if they hadn't rehearsed it beforehand, they all replied in unison. "Take care of her." "Yes. Chun Yan is our younger sister, so we have to take care of her." The little guy was a little confused. The students in the class were too enthusiastic. After hearing such warm applause and cheers, the tension on the little guy's face slowly dissipated, and he gradually revealed a shy smile. She stood silently in the corridor, smiling as he watched his daughter reintegrate into a new big family. This scene was somewhat familiar. That smart and sensible little baby had finally grown into a shy flower bud. Girls matured earlier, and Yin was on the tall side. Even in the third grade, she was considered average height, so the teacher could only arrange for her to sit in the third row from the back. One had to know that the little brat now was incredible. Not to mention the third grade, even kindergarten had the phenomenon of puppy love. Regarding this, many parents' reactions were, "The child is still young and doesn't know anything. It's just two people together for fun." On this point, their understanding was too one-sided. Actually, children also knew what it meant to be in a relationship. It was just that their thinking was still very simple and they couldn't understand the meaning of the word sex. What was wrong with children? Couldn't children like other people? Thinking about the opposite sex day and night, yearning for the opposite sex day and night. This wasn't something only adults could do. Children could also like people. It was just that some children were too shy. Even if they liked someone very much, they would never show the slightest bit of it. They would even show an inexplicable hostility to the person they liked. In the words of an adult, it should be, 300 taels of silver here. In Chun-Shi's eyes, Nian Nian was simply a little kid who hadn't been weaned yet. But in the eyes of her peers, Nian Nian, on the other hand, was a true goddess. There were many precocious children in this class, at least half of them. Therefore, when Nian Nian finished her self-introduction and walked from the podium to her seat, almost everyone was staring at her. Some of the bolder ones stared straight at her, not even blinking their eyes. Some of the more timid ones deliberately turned their heads to the side and secretly looked out of the corner of their eyes. Almost every child had their own thoughts about this student who had suddenly skipped a grade. However, most of the boys' hearts were filled with admiration, while most of the girls' hearts were filled with jealousy. Chun-Shi naturally saw the subtle changes on everyone's faces. However, he was like many parents and didn't take these things to heart. They were just children. They were the flowers of the motherland. They were the pillars of the motherland's future. How could they have so many dirty thoughts? Seeing the little guy sitting down, Chun-Shi's mood immediately relaxed. He gave Big Cat a look, and the cat immediately understood Chun-Shi's meaning. So, like a wisp of smoke, it leapt up to the big tree in the middle of the school building, and then laid down on a tree branch facing third-year class 2 to take a nap. Then, Chun-Shi nodded at the teacher through the window to thank him, and then quietly left. The little guy seemed to have noticed that her father had left, so she quickly looked out of the window, but there was no one there. Seeing this, a trace of disappointment flashed across her face. But soon, this disappointment disappeared with the new teaching materials handed out by the teacher. By the time she took out a fountain pen and solemnly wrote her name on the first page of each book, her third-year studies had officially begun. Thieves in first grade, thieves in second grade. No one chased after the third-grade beauties. Love letters from the fourth grade flew everywhere. Piles of homework from the fifth grade. Pairs of lovebirds from the sixth grade. This is our class song. Once, it was too loud and alarmed the teaching director. Then, the whole class was scolded by him. Well, at that time, I was in third grade. The last few lines are more serious, so I won't write them here. Chapter 503. After settling the little girl down, Chun-Shi left the school. As soon as he walked out of the school gate, he looked up and saw Qin Ruoying in a white dress, waiting quietly by the side of the road. In fact, Chun-Shi had already said that there was no need for two people to pick up and drop off the child, but Qin Ruoying did not pay attention to him at all, and completely treated sending Nian Nian to school as something that she had to do every day. Ying, okay, where do you want to go today? I'll go with you. Before he arrived, Chun-Shi's voice came from afar. Qin Ruoying thought for a while, but shook her head gently, and then responded very indifferently. I won't go shopping today. Let's go home first. I have a few questions about cultivation that I want to ask you. Ask? Hearing this, Chun-Shi was suddenly happy, so he quickly went over and said politely, What's the relationship between the two of us? Do you still need to use the word ask? Qin Ruoying rolled her eyes at him and did not say anything. Seeing this, Chun-Shi did not feel offended at all. Instead, he happily reached out his hand to hail a taxi. After this period of time together, Qin Ruoying's attitude towards him had improved a lot. On one hand, it was because of the family's enthusiasm toward her. On the other hand, it was entirely because she gradually found many traces of her existence in her daily life. For example, the familiar feeling of walking in the alley, the flowers in the yard, and the photos in the phone, all of these things seemed to be saying, she was the mistress of this family. Therefore, Qin Ruoying's attitude towards Chun-Shi gradually improved. Although she had not recalled any memories of the past, at least she had regained the feeling of cultivation under the reminder of her sister-in-law. In addition, it seemed that only when she was cultivating, she could faintly find the intimate feeling that she had with Chun-Shi. The many changes in Qin Ruoying were naturally seen by Chun-Shi. Therefore, every time he thought of this problem, he could not help but feel a burst of joy in his heart. If it continued to develop at this rate, wouldn't it not be long before he could climb into Yingying's bed again? They didn't wander around today, so when the couple returned to the side courtyard, it was only 9 in the morning. As soon as Chun-Shi pushed open the door, the sound of punches and kicks could be heard from the courtyard. It was his sister-in-law and her 2 punching bags. After this period of actual combat, Chung-Hua and Yiji's martial arts had greatly improved. When the 2 of them joined forces, they could even easily survive 200 to 300 rounds against Qin Shiueching. Chun-Shi didn't want to disturb them. After nodding slightly to his sister-in-law, he followed Qin Ruoying to the west wing. However, although Qin-Shi didn't intend to interrupt them, Chung-Hua directly jumped out of the battle circle the moment he appeared, then quickly came in front of him and said hurriedly, "Mr. Qin, thank you for taking care of me during this period of time. I thank you in advance." Hearing this, Chun-Shi had to temporarily stop his footsteps. He glanced at Qin Ruoying's back, then glanced at Chung-Hua's anxious face. In the end, he could only let out a long sigh, then asked impatiently, "What's the matter?" It was no wonder that Chun-Shi's attitude was so bad. After all, he could only step into the west wing every day at this time. Being delayed by Chung-Hua like this directly affected the time he had to chat with Yingying and cultivate their relationship. Chung-Hua was shocked by Chun-Shi's bad attitude. But after being stunned for a moment, he seemed to have mustered up some courage. He quickly lowered his head and cupped his fist to Chun-Shi and said loudly, "I've been away from home for a long time. Next month is my mother's birthday. On such an important day, I hope you will allow me to go home and visit my mother. I understand. I am a sinner. Whether I live or die depends on your whims. My requests may seem rude, but please allow me to return home for 3 days to fulfill my filial piety, sir. If you are worried, I can make a vow here that I will come back as soon as possible. If I disobey, Xinyuan Chung-Hua is willing to be struck by lightning and not enter the cycle of reincarnation after death." Perhaps he was afraid that Chun-Shi wouldn't agree, so Chung-Hua spilled the beans like a bamboo tube, spilling everything he wanted to say. After speaking, this kid was like a child who had done something wrong. He tilted his head and peeked at Chun-Shi eagerly. "It is your mother's 100th birthday, so you want to go home to fulfill your filial piety?" Hearing this, Chun-Shi did not immediately respond. Instead, he looked at his sister-in-law thoughtfully. Although he had caught this kid with his own hands, he had already handed them over to his sister-in-law to deal with. Looking at this posture, this kid seemed to have calculated that he was easier to talk to than Qin Shiueching. So, he did not even ask for Qin Shiueching's opinion and directly came to ask for his approval. Chun-Shi did not speak, but Chung-Hua was a little anxious. So, he immediately knelt on the ground, bowed and shouted, "I hope you will allow me to go home on account of my filial piety. If not, I would rather commit suicide on the spot than live an ignoble life in this world." Chung-Hua's words were powerful and resonating. After hearing this, Chun-Shi laughed. "Oh, are you threatening me?" After hearing Chun-Shi's words, Chung-Hua's heart suddenly jumped. He suddenly remembered Chun-Shi's character. Oh no! Mr. Chen was always amenable to coaxing, but not coercion. He had to change his method of asking him. Thinking of this, Chung-Hua immediately changed his strategy. Instead, he looked at Chun-Shi with grief and indignation. At the same time, he looked at Chun-Shi with a pitiful expression. Seeing that this kid had stopped talking and was looking at him so pitifully, Chun-Shi was too lazy to tease him anymore. So, he directly asked Qin Shiueching, "Since the 2 of them are under your care, how do you think we should deal with this matter?" Hearing this, before Qin Shiueching could speak, a trace of despair flashed across Chung-Hua's face. They had known each other for so long. Chun-Shi would invite the 2 of them to sit down and eat together when he had nothing to do. But what about Qin Shiueching? Every day, she would beat them up violently. She had never been kind to them. Therefore, the moment he heard Chun-Shi ask for Qin Shiueching's opinion, Chung-Hua's heart had already lost all hope. But what Chung-Hua did not expect was Qin Shueqing's answer was 10,000 times better than he had imagined. Everyone is parents. Since he is so filial, this request is not too much. But the two of you remember, this trip can't be delayed for too long. I heard that it takes 4 days to go back and forth from Earth to the Supreme Palace enclosure. In that case, I'll give the two of you 7 days off. If I don't see the two of you back after 7 days, I think the two of you should know very well what the consequences will be. After speaking, Qin Shueqing walked to the east wing without looking back. Only the two of them were left standing there in a daze. She agreed just like that. Cheng Hua was in a daze. Yiji blinked and could not help but wonder if he had heard wrongly. It was not his mother's birthday. He did not expect that he could actually go home with Cheng Hua to visit his family. Qin Shueqing actually agreed. Seeing the two of them looking as if they had seen a ghost, Qin Shi could not help but smile. Then he turned around and walked into the west wing. If Cheng Hua and Yiji were to be seen as students, then Qin Shueqing was obviously their class teacher, whom they feared like a tiger. Mischievous bad children were never liked by teachers. The two of them knew their place. Therefore, if they were to ask their class teacher to sign a leave of absence, they would rather forge a leave of absence than step into their class teacher's office. This was the general prejudice that bad children had against their class teacher. In fact, why would a class teacher discriminate against every child in her class? Therefore, even though her sister-in-law beat the two of them up every day, actually, she was very warm in her heart. Chapter 504. After getting Chen Shi and Qin Shueqing's approval, Cheng Hua and Yiji could finally leave this planet that made them feel sad at this moment. Although Chen Shi did not leave any restrictions on them, the two of them were tactful, so they did not even think of using this opportunity to escape from Qin Shueqing's evil clutches. The two of them seemed to have already accepted their fate. Even Cheng Hua, who had always had a fiery temper, did not have any intention of encouraging Yiji to escape after regaining control of the cloud-piercing shuttle at this moment. Instead, he looked back at the azure planet with some reluctance. As expected of a great figure in the supreme realm, such breadth of mind and boldness, you are really a role model for our generation. Yiji did not notice the strange look on Cheng Hua's face. Perhaps to relieve the depressing atmosphere on the ship, Yiji stood at the stern of the ship and sighed with emotion. Then, as if he suddenly thought of something, he could not help but tease with a smile. Cheng Hua, let's hide in the heavenly market enclosure, shall we? Cheng Hua did not reply. Seeing this, Yiji was like a demon tempting people to fall into depravity. He moved closer to Cheng Hua and continued to bewitch him. How about the purple myrtle enclosure? The 3 enclosures are like 3 wooden rafts floating in the vast void. Although their whereabouts are uncertain and difficult to find, they converge once every 100 years. I heard my father mention it before we set off. The next time the 3 enclosures converge should be within the next 10 years. You see, when the time comes, we only need to hide in the heavenly market enclosure or the purple myrtle enclosure. So, what if Mr. Chen is a supreme realm cultivator? Could it be that he can turn the 3 enclosures upside down and be determined to find us? Yiji kept bewitching Cheng Hua. If it was the old Cheng Hua, he might have been persuaded by him and jumped up to hide in the heavenly market enclosure. But unfortunately, after experiencing Qin Shueqing's constant hardships, Cheng Hua's temperament had been restrained a lot. Therefore, after hearing Yiji's incessant chatter, Cheng Hua immediately slapped him in annoyance and then scolded him with a smile on his face. Do you really take me for a fool? If you want to go, then go. What's the use of telling me this? I'm the one who swore to Mr. Chen, not you. What are you afraid of? After hearing Cheng Hua say this, Yiji immediately felt relieved. The reason why he tried to bewitch Cheng Hua was because he was afraid that Cheng Hua would act without thinking like before. As the saying goes, a fall into the pit, a gain in your wit. Yiji was very pleased with Cheng Hua's change, so he sat next to him with a smile and then chatted with him casually. Cheng Hua, I don't know what you're thinking, but I think it's actually pretty good for us to stay here. Although we're controlled by others and are punched and kicked by that evil woman every day like a slave, But if we think about it from another perspective, the two of us seem to have learned a lot from it. What's more, Mr. Chen is still in the supreme stage. Even if it's just a simple sentence or two, it will be of great benefit to our future cultivation. So, at this point, Iji deliberately paused and then said with a determined face, "After 7 days, I will definitely be back here." After hearing Iji's words, Changhua seemed to be a little dispirited and didn't seem to be interested in paying attention to him at all. Iji felt that Chenghua's behavior was a little strange today, so he couldn't help but push him and then asked with a puzzled face, "What's wrong with you? Aren't you happy to be home?" Hearing this, Changhua shook his head and then muttered in a very strange tone, "Don't mess around. I'm thinking about a very serious problem." "What problem?" "I'm thinking about whether Nian Nian will like the taste of the dragon's saliva fruit. You see, it's rare for the two of us to go home. We should take this opportunity to bring some gifts back for Nian Nian, right? But I thought about it, and I didn't think of what to bring her. Think about it yourself. What does Nian Nian usually treat us to? Chocolate, biscuits, jelly, French fries, yogurt. These are all delicacies in the world. As a return gift, we can't take out something too shabby, right?" After hearing Changhua say this, Iji couldn't help but be stunned. "Oh, right. I actually forgot such an important thing. Come. Let's quickly think about what gifts we should bring for Nian Nian." Time flew like an arrow, and the sun and moon flew like a shuttle. In the blink of an eye, a month's time passed. During this time, the adults were busy cultivating in seclusion all day long, and because the little girl skipped a grade, she needed to spend more time reviewing her homework every day. Everyone was busy with their own things, and the courtyard was much quieter because of this. As time passed, although Qin Xueqing didn't have any clear expression, the expression on her face was so gloomy that it seemed like water was about to drip out. They clearly agreed on 7 days, and a month had already passed, but Changhua and Iji still hadn't returned to Earth. Were these two brats playing with her like a monkey? As soon as she thought of this problem, Qin Xueqing's towering chest couldn't help but begin to rise and fall rapidly. After enduring for a full month, she couldn't bear it anymore. Therefore, Qin Xueqing found Chen Shi and wanted to borrow a xingcha from him. "Do you still have a xingcha? Lend it to me." Hearing this, Chen Shi raised his eyebrows and asked, "What do you want to do?" "Find someone. I want to see. Can they hide to the ends of the earth?" Seeing Qin Xueqing gnashing her teeth in anger, Chen Shi suddenly laughed. "I think they might be delayed by something. Don't worry, it's only been a month. Wait a little longer, there's no rush. How about this? If they don't come back by next month, I'll find time to go to Supreme Palace Enclosure again, and I'll definitely catch the two of them for you, okay?" After hearing Chen Shi's promise, Qin Xueqing finally withdrew the idea of going to Supreme Palace Enclosure. Then, like an inflated blowfish, she angrily returned to the East Wing room. It couldn't be helped. His sister-in-law's temper was just that bad. If Chen Shi really gave her a xingcha, she would probably immediately go to Supreme Palace Enclosure to find Changhua and Iji to reason with them. His sister-in-law was furious, but Chen Shi didn't seem to care too much. This was because he believed that Changhua and Iji would never dare to trick him. After all, the name Mr. Chen. Now, even if it was at Supreme Palace Enclosure, it could be considered a golden signboard. Calm. Wonderful book house.
Calm.
Chapter 5:05. Chen Shi was certain that Changhua and Iji would come back, so he didn't take this matter to heart for the time being. Next, let's talk about the little girl first. After a month of adaptation, the little girl had successfully integrated into the new class. Although she was a year younger than her classmates, they didn't dare to look down on her. On one hand, it was because Nian Nian's usual performance was very good, so the teachers liked her very much. On the other hand, it was entirely because of her results in this monthly exam. In Hua Xia's education system, academic results were the only standard to measure a child's quality. Although the little girl skipped a grade, her results in this monthly exam still easily took first place in her grade. Therefore, when the teacher announced the results, the whole class was shocked. Wasn't this the other family's child that parents often talked about? The teacher also said before that after the monthly exam, the class monitor would be selected based on everyone's performance. And in this so-called comprehensive performance, wasn't the exam results the most important indicator? The teachers didn't like children who were unreasonable. Those children who were obedient and sensible, but their grades weren't good enough to convince the masses. Nianyan's performance and results were very good, plus she was the class monitor in the first grade class, so what reason did the teacher have to not let her be the class monitor? Outstanding children would always be singled out as an example. Therefore, this little girl who had just skipped a grade and entered the third grade, after a monthly exam, her name had already spread throughout the entire grade. On this day, as usual, after the little girl waved goodbye to Qinshi, she quickly walked to the classroom and prepared to organize everyone to start the morning reading as the class monitor. This was the first task she received after becoming the class monitor, so she was especially attentive to it. As soon as she sat down, she couldn't wait to take out the language textbook from her bag and neatly placed it on the table. It wasn't time for class yet, so only half of the students were there, but the classroom was especially lively. Nianyan looked back and saw that the most mischievous children in the class were chasing each other with brooms. Therefore, she immediately shouted to stop them. Quiet. Class is about to begin. It was the class monitor's responsibility to maintain discipline. Now that she had become the class monitor, she naturally had to take on this responsibility. Following her outburst, the classroom suddenly became much quieter. Seeing this, the children who were chasing each other stopped and quickly returned to their seats. They were not afraid of Nianyan, but they were afraid that Nianyan would tell on them to the teacher. Nowadays, a class leader who doesn't snitch, is that still the class leader? If Nianyan's prestige in Year 1 Class 2 was earned through her fists, then her prestige in Year 3 Class 2 was earned through her own outstanding performance. It was the third year. No matter how late a child matured, he should be more sensible by now. Teacher Zhang stepped into the classroom just as the bell rang. Looking at the silent classroom, Teacher Zhang couldn't help but nod his head in satisfaction. Then, he gestured for Nianyan to come to the podium and lead everyone to start the morning reading. The text for today's morning reading was Zhaozhou Bridge. It was a simplified version with pinyin annotations. The whole text was less than 500 words. After Nianyan led the students to read the text twice, the teacher nodded his head in satisfaction and officially began the day's lesson. There were a total of 46 students in their class. It wasn't a large number, so the desks and chairs were all a single set and not a two-person set. After Nianyan returned to her seat, she took out the textbooks and put them in her drawer, as usual. At this moment, she suddenly realized he didn't know when this strange thing appeared in his drawer. Nianyan took out the thing and saw that it was a letter folded into the shape of a heart. The style of the letter was very exquisite, and it even had a faint fragrance. It was obvious that this was the most popular letter paper in the school's canteen. There was a name written on the heart-shaped letter. It was Chen Nian. Nianyan frowned and opened it. The first thing she saw was a few lines of crooked, worm-like love messages. To Chen Nian, I like you. My love for you is very deep as a bottomless pit. I don't look good, but I'm a good person. I'll give you a gift right away. Can you tell me your QQ? And where is your home? My body won't go with you, but my heart will go anywhere with you. Moi, heart, 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 heart. Of course, this was the translated version. There were many wrong words in the original text. The child who wrote this didn't seem to know how to write love. After writing it wrong several times, he directly drew a lot of hearts on it. This was a love letter? Nianyan expressionlessly read the contents of the letter. Then, as if nothing had happened, she directly tore the letter that carried the strong love of others into pieces. No one, including the teacher, noticed anything strange about her. She was silent like this, as if she suddenly had something on her mind. In fact, Nianyan already knew what a love letter was and what it meant. But she never thought that one day, she would also be the one to receive a love letter. Then there was a problem. When faced with such a situation, what should she do? Should she tell the teacher, or should she tell her father? It was probably because the writer had forgotten to sign the letter, so she didn't even know who wrote this strange love letter. What should she do? What should she do? The little girl had something on her mind, so she was obviously a little muddle-headed for the rest of the day. Finally, the crisp and melodious school bell rang. After the teacher assigned the homework for the day, the little girl uncharacteristically rushed out of the classroom with her bag. She ran as fast as she could. Soon, she ran to the school gate. Then, through the school gate, she saw her father standing in the crowd and waving at her. Unlike the teacher, Qin almost instantly noticed the strangeness on the little girl's face. So, he immediately walked out of the crowd and squatted on the ground, smiling and motioning her to come out. Dad. As if she had suffered a great grievance, the little girl ran out of the school gate and threw herself into Qin's arms. Seeing this, Qin's eyebrows suddenly twisted. Nian, what's wrong? Were you bullied at school? Don't be afraid. Tell Dad what happened. Dad will help you. When I was writing, I suddenly thought of a song. Let me recommend Love Letter by Jackie Chungo. Unfortunately, love is not a few drops of tears or a few love letters. This may be a little cruel. People who wait for others to give them happiness often don't live happily. Chapter 506. Looking at his daughter's depressed look, Qin's heart suddenly clenched. After he walked out of the crowd with the little girl, he immediately squatted on the ground, then hugged her and asked patiently, Nian, what's wrong? Did someone bully you? Although the little girl's face had a somewhat aggrieved expression, it did not look like she was bullied. Moreover, with her current physical condition, if she was really angry and went berserk, there would be no problem for her to beat up children of the same age. Therefore, the first thought that came to Qin's mind was actually Nian was ostracized by her classmates. After all, she was a child who skipped a grade. It was normal for her to not be able to integrate into the new group in a short period of time. Qin had already mentally prepared himself for this, so he immediately began to think about how he could enlighten the little girl. A person's life was a process of constant adaptation. If she wanted to shrink back because she could not adapt to skipping a grade, how could Nian smoothly adapt to other environments in the future? He had to persuade her properly. But on second thought, Qin had an idea in his mind. But at this moment, the little girl suddenly said timidly, Daddy, someone wrote me a letter. A letter? What letter? Suddenly hearing Nian's words, Qin's train of thought was suddenly disrupted. A letter? What did she mean? He did not react at all. The father and daughter stood by the street, staring at each other blankly. In an instant, Qin only felt a flash of lightning in his mind, and almost instantly, he vaguely understood the meaning of the little girl's words. So, he immediately squeezed out a smile, then pretended to be relaxed and asked, Nian, who wrote you a letter? Can you show it to Daddy? As soon as his voice fell, Qin pretended to look at the little girl with a face full of anticipation. However, what he did not expect was the little girl who had always been obedient to him, this time after hearing his words, shook her head at him for the first time. It's over. Seeing the little fellow's performance, Qin's heart sank. She thought about how the cabbage she had painstakingly planted had been eaten by the pig next door before it was time for it to bloom and bear fruit at that moment. Qin even had the urge to kill. It must be those bad kids who bullied Nian for her ignorance. Otherwise, how could a child like her understand such things? Lousy school. I will tear it down tomorrow. As a kind and open-minded father, Qin firmly believed that his daughter could still be saved. Therefore, he immediately tossed those inexplicable guesses to the back of his mind and exhaled deeply. Then, he put on an extremely solemn expression. No matter what, he had to make the little guy realize the seriousness of this problem today. However, just as Qin was about to reprimand her, the little girl seemed to have suddenly thought of something and replied calmly, I tore up the letter. Torn? Qin was stunned. Then, he took the little girl into his arms and laughed excitedly. The youngest daughter is sensible. Well done. Well done. MD. He had long heard that children nowadays were very mature. But he also did not expect to think that children nowadays would mature to such an extent. Nian was only a little over 7 years old. Although she had skipped a grade and her classmates were generally 1 or 2 years older than her, they were still only 8 or 9 years old children. Don't you want to watch cartoons anymore? Not playing Mobile Legends? Actually had the leisure to come and flirt with his daughter? Fortunately, Nian did not let him down. If it were not for the many parents at the school gate, Chen was afraid that he would be so excited that he would shout to the sky, "Well done." She was very satisfied with the little fellow's way of dealing with it. But on second thought, he could not help but feel a little worried. After all, the problem of puppy love was more serious than being unable to adapt to skipping a grade. Looking at the cute little girl in front of him, She could not help but feel a little lost. How should he put it? In Chi's eyes, Nian was simply a child who did not even show any gender characteristics. Children were children. Children were not differentiated by gender.
But now?
Someone had actually started to write a love letter to Nian. Although Nian tore the letter, this could only treat the symptoms and not the root cause. In fact, She was very clear in his heart. As the child continued to grow up, Nian's charm would only increase. Just like Ying in the past, the grown-up Nian only needed to stand there, and it should be enough to attract the attention of all the opposite sex nearby. Now that the first love letter had appeared, there would definitely be a second one, a third one, and even countless of them. Then there was a problem. As a parent, what should he do? Even when he was besieged by the 4 immortals, Shi was not so nervous. He frowned tightly and kept telling himself not to think too much, but he still could not help but think of the worst. Some things, the more he thought about it, the more terrifying it was. Shi frowned and didn't say anything. The little girl waited for a long time. After seeing that her father was still frowning, she tilted her head slightly and pondered. She was a very smart child and naturally knew what her father was worried about. Therefore, after hesitating for a moment, Nian took the initiative to hug Shi's neck and said softly, "Dad, don't worry, I won't fall in love at a young age." Shi subconsciously swallowed her saliva. He was still hesitating on how to bring it up, but he did not expect the little girl to take the initiative to mention this issue. A child who is just over 7 years old actually discussed the topic of puppy love with her parents. Such a scene, just thinking about it, would feel a little awkward and strange. Nian, do you know what puppy love means? I know, there used to be a lot of people in our class who fell in love at a young age, but I didn't tell the teacher. Really? She was shocked. Obviously, the class that the little girl mentioned was the first year, second class. A first-year child learned how to fall in love. What was going on with this world? It had to be said that Shi's worldview was greatly impacted. But on second thought, he was a little relieved. The situation should not be as serious as he thought. After all, the information on the internet was too advanced now. The amount of information that children could obtain was far more than children in the 80s and 90s. Naturally, they would know more than children in the 80s and 90s. Falling in love was a popular word at the moment. Children were very curious, so naturally they would learn this slightly novel way of getting along with each other from various channels. Coupled with the special nature of the school environment, it was not surprising that there were many young couples in a class under the vicious influence of spreading rumors. Chapter 507. If. At this point, Shi could not help but pause. After hesitating for a moment, he nervously probed, "If you have someone you like in the future, you know what it means to like, right? It means that you really want to play with someone every day, and that person also likes to play with you. Will you fall in love early like other students?" For parents, this question was indeed a bit awkward. Children were not sensible. Their understanding of early love was naturally very different from the understanding of early love of adults. In fact, for children under the 4th grade to fall in love early, at most, it was a hazy good feeling. And this kind of good feeling was very easy to change. The child today liked A, tomorrow it might be B, and the day after tomorrow it might suddenly like C, who got first place in class. If A, B, and C were seen as toys, it was naturally easy to understand this problem. Children were both curious and liked to explore at the same time. Therefore, when encountering this kind of thing, it was best for parents not to be too agitated to the extent of going overboard. Correct guidance was the best way to solve the problem. As the saying goes, it is better to let go than to block. Chun-Shi tried to use a hypothetical method to let the little girl understand the disadvantages of early love. But what he did not expect was, as soon as he said his hypothesis, the little girl directly shook her head and then replied with a firm expression, "No, I won't like anyone, and I won't fall in love with anyone." Hearing this, Chun-Shi could not help but ask, "Are you so sure?"
Why?
"Because they are too stupid. I don't like to play with them." Looking at the little girl's expression of disdain, Chun-Shi suddenly understood. So she thought that her classmates were too stupid, so no one could enter her eyes at all? Although Wenwen and Mingming are also very stupid, but they have always been my best friends, so I don't dislike them. Also, I know what it means to like. If puppy love means two people are together all day long, then if I play with Wenwen and Mingming every day, isn't that also early love? We're not dating. We're good friends. So, Dad, your example is wrong. After hearing his daughter's reasonable rebuttal, Chun-Shi couldn't help but be speechless. But on second thought, it was as if he had heard something happy. After laughing and shaking his head, he stretched out his neck and kissed the little fellow's face heavily. Muah. The little fellow was preoccupied with expressing her views on puppy love. Suddenly, she was ambushed by Chun-Shi and immediately forgot what she was going to say next. "Daddy, you're so annoying." After saying that, the little thing buried its head in Chun-Shi's shoulder, seemingly a little shy. "Silly child, are you shy now?" After today's conversation, Chun-Shi finally realized Nian Nian was really starting to grow up. Time is always relative. Now let's rewind time to 1 month ago. After a period of hurrying, Cheng Hua and Yi successfully arrived at the Supreme Palace enclosure on the 3rd day after they set off. Chun-Shi didn't have a habit of showing off in front of children, so the two of them didn't know that Chun-Shi had caused a ruckus in the jade clear grotto heaven. They also didn't know that the Tuoba family had suffered heavy losses because of it. As the instigators of all this, the two brats only had the chance to visit home after leaving home for almost a year. Thus, just as the cloud-piercing shuttle flew into the sky above Ning Province, Yi couldn't contain his excitement anymore. He jumped off the cloud-piercing shuttle and flew as fast as he could to the Dongfang family. He had already discussed with Cheng Hua beforehand. Everyone would go back to their own families and find their mothers. 3 days later, they would meet here and head back to Earth together. The 3 great families of Ning Province were the Xianyuan family, the Dongfang family, and the Tuoba family. In terms of status, the two of them actually had very high positions in their families. But it was also because of this that the pressure they faced far exceeded that of their peers. Cheng Hua could be used as an example. His father was Genrio, one of the 8 great elders of the Xianyuan family. Since he was one of the 8 great elders of the Xianyuan family, Genrio's cultivation naturally wouldn't be weak. In reality, Genrio, who was in the early stage of soul formation, was already more than 800 years old. Immortal cultivators had long lifespans, but when it came to bearing children, they were far inferior to mortals. As the saying goes, the unseen world has its own will. Under the influence of the laws of heaven and earth, the higher one's cultivation, the lower their chances of bearing children. Genrio had 9 sons and 4 daughters in his life. Cheng Hua was Genrio's youngest child, and at the same time, his last child. Cheng Hua's talent wasn't bad. In addition, Genrio had a child at an old age, so it was inevitable that he would especially spoil this youngest child. Logically speaking, Cheng Hua should have lived a very comfortable life since he was born in one of the 3 great families of Ning Province, and his father was one of the 8 great elders of the Xianyuan family. After all, he was a rich second generation. But it was a pity reality was always slightly different from what outsiders imagined. In reality, Cheng Hua's life wasn't good at all. Chenghua's mother was called Zhang, and she came from a small family in Ning province. Because of her outstanding appearance, Genrio made an exception and took her in as a concubine. What needed to be understood here was how long a cultivator's life was. If one didn't have someone to accompany them on the long road, wouldn't their life be very lonely? Because of this, cultivators usually viewed status as extremely important. Even though Xianyuan Yuanliang had countless women, other than his first wife, First Madam, the only one who had a proper status with him was the second Madam, Madame Zhang. From this, it could be seen that Zhang was definitely not someone to be trifled with. However, although Zhang's methods were powerful, she was still a woman, so there were many things that Zhang couldn't decide. For example, Chenghua's eldest brother always used the excuse of training as an excuse to often throw Chenghua into an extremely dangerous place and left him to fend for himself there. And this was the fundamental reason why Chenghua dared to recklessly enter the Tianshu ruins later on. As a mother, Zhang saw everything, but she couldn't think of any way to help her son, who asked Chenghua to only have one big brother left. Both of them were flesh and blood. In addition, his eldest brother always had a reasonable explanation, so Genrio wouldn't help his youngest son at all. Instead, he would think that his eldest son did the right thing. No matter how noble their birth was, cultivators would face all kinds of unexpected difficulties and crises in their lives. If they could make it through, it would be an opportunity. If they couldn't make it through, it would be fate. Everyone was already used to this. Chenghua should have had many brothers and sisters. Unfortunately, most of his brothers and sisters had fallen. Now, only the powerful fifth brother and eighth sister, who had already married into the Dongfang family, were left. Genrio didn't want to be sad, so from the day Chenghua was born, his fifth brother became the eldest brother, and his eighth sister became the second sister. Under normal circumstances, siblings should help each other and complement each other. Chenghua's family was an exception. If one had to use a word to describe the relationship between the two brothers, then this word must be like strangers. Chapter 508. Chenghua's eldest brother was Genuan Jingqi, who was over 300 years old this year. Ever since he broke through to Yuanying, Genuan Jingqi had been given a position in the family as a steward. He was considered to have officially stepped into the core management of the Xianyuan family. It was important to note that any child with the blood of one of the three major families in their veins, regardless of whether they were from the main family or the side family, had to work hard to gain the family's approval. For anyone in the family, status had to be fought for. Since Genuan Jingqi was able to step into Yuanying at the age of 300, at this rate, as long as nothing too big happened in the future, he would definitely have the opportunity to successfully inherit Genrio's legacy and become one of the 8 elders. What were the 8 elders? They were second only to one person and above everyone else. Seeing that his eldest son was so promising, Genrio naturally hoped that his youngest son could be as outstanding as his eldest son. Thus, after Chenghua was born, Genrio handed over the task of educating him to Genuan Jingqi. And this was the beginning of Chenghua's tragedy. Genuan Jingqi didn't seem to like this little brother of his. After all, they weren't born from the same mother. When Chenghua was still an infant, Genuan Jingqi used the excuse of cleansing his meridians to soak Chenghua in all sorts of strange potions. He even called it a medicinal bath. Zhang had secretly investigated this so-called medicinal bath. Based on the dregs of the medicine left behind, she could roughly confirm that the medicine inside was poisonous. Because of this, Zhang didn't hesitate to have a big argument with Genuan Jingqi. She always felt that Chenghua's half-brother had ulterior motives. He might want to murder Chenghua, so she didn't want Genuan Jingqi to get close to Chenghua. Zhang originally wanted to use this opportunity to completely drive Genuan Jingqi away from Chenghua. Who would have thought that when Genrio heard about this, he would only ask Genuan Jingqi to show her the ancient book that recorded the formula of the medicinal bath, and then mercilessly scolded her. This ancient book was painstakingly obtained by Jingqi from the jade clear cave heaven. I have already checked it beforehand. The herbs used in the book seem to be poisonous, but in fact, the principle of using poison to fight poison is used. Therefore, the effect of the medicine is better than ordinary herbs. Zhengqi is my child, and so is Changhua. Since they are brothers, why would Jingqi hurt Changhua for no reason? I think you are measuring the heart of a gentleman with the yardstick of a villain. Don't blame me for not reminding you. Chenghua's talent is slightly better than Jingqi's. If he ends up with nothing in the future, don't blame me for not caring about the relationship between husband and wife. Genryo was one of the 8 elders in the family and also the head of the family. His words naturally carried a lot of weight. After this, Zhang lost the right to raise Changhua. Mother and son could only see each other on certain days. For the rest of the time, Changhua could only bitterly endure all kinds of inhumane torture in Genuan Jingqi. Of course, Xianyuan Jingqi would never torture Changhua himself. He would only be like a god who was high up in the sky. He would give his younger brother all kinds of death-seeking missions, and he would call it training. Fortunately, no matter how difficult these experiences were, Changhua still managed to pull through in the end. As for the love and hate entanglement between Changhua and his older brother, I won't go into too much detail here. Let's get back to the main story first. Today was Zhang's birthday, which was also her 100th birthday. 100 years old. No matter how long a cultivator lived, how many 100 years could they live in their lifetime? What's more, for someone like Zhang who wasn't very talented, there was basically no hope of yuanying in this lifetime. If it had been someone else, they would have definitely thrown a big party when their birthday was coming to an end. Genryo originally planned to do this as well. After all, he was one of the 8 elders of the Xianyuan family. Whenever there was a happy occasion in the family, even the head of the family would personally come to congratulate him. But it was a pity. Ever since Zhang found out that Changhua had entered the Tianshu ruins, she shut herself in her room and refused to see anyone. Genryo originally wanted to take advantage of her birthday to comfort her, but he didn't expect that Zhang would mercilessly block him outside the room. Now that Er's life is uncertain, as his mother, I really don't have the leisure to do that. Please don't blame me. Genryo didn't force his way in, nor did he use his divine sense to probe the situation in the room. This was because he heard a trace of despair in Zhang's voice. That's right. Now that Chenghua's life was uncertain, how could Zhang still smile? Ever since the day Qin Shi wreaked havoc in the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven, everyone had a new understanding of the Tianshu ruins. Although the truth wasn't as mysterious as the legends, at least everyone knew that there was at least one supreme being living in there. What's more, this supreme being could even fight the 4 perfected masters of the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven alone. Then, with his methods, could it be that he couldn't block the heart flame lamp senses? Therefore, even if Chenghua's heart flame lamp hadn't been extinguished, Genryo found it very hard to believe that Changhua was still alive in this world. Sigh. After a deep sigh, Genryo could only silently turn around and leave. In order to not let anyone disturb Zhang, Genryo didn't forget to remind the servants not to let anyone take half a step into the courtyard after leaving. Now, he could only hope that Zhang could walk out of this shadow as soon as possible. After all, Genryo had lived for several hundred years and was already used to seeing life and death. Therefore, when he learned that Changhua might never come back, he didn't appear too sad or emotional. It was impossible to say that he wasn't sad. But what was the use of being sad? As an immortal cultivator, Genryo had experienced too many life and death separations in his life. That old heart of his had long been numb. But it was precisely because his heart had long been numb that Genryo didn't know at all. This woman who had locked herself in her room all day because of the loss of her son, in such a state of despair, what terrible things would she do in a dim room? Zhang sat quietly by the bed alone, holding an old rag doll in her hand. This rag doll was personally sewn for Changhua. It was also Cheng Hua's favorite toy when he was young. Perhaps she was thinking of him when she saw it. Zhang gently stroked the rag doll with her fingers as she softly muttered, Hua, don't worry. Mother has already reached an agreement with a holy church. Very soon, they will let Big Brother accompany you to the Tianshu ruins. Her voice was very soft, but the expression on her face was very strange. Sometimes she chuckled, sometimes she was sad. As if she was possessed, it gave people a horrifying and strange feeling. 9 Heavens, Divine Emperor. Chapter 509. The first madam had passed away many years ago, so apart from Genryo, Zhang had the highest status in the family. However, so what if she had a high status? Genryo still thought that Zhang's cultivation was too low and that she was not talented enough to guide Cheng Hua properly. That was why he had left Cheng Hua in the care of his eldest brother since he was young. But what happened in the end? Now that Cheng Hua's fate was unknown, Zhang naturally took it to heart. She felt that Cheng Hua was forced to his death by his eldest brother and father. Her son was forced to his death, so as Cheng Hua's mother, how could she continue to remain calm? One had to know that when a woman went crazy, she would not recognize her own family. To Zhang, although the Xianyuan family was huge, there was nothing in it that she was reluctant to part with. Cheng Hua's trip to the Tianshu ruins could only end in death. As a result, Madame Zhang's heart was filled with hatred. She hated everyone, including Genryo. Just as she had said before, if something really happened to Cheng Hua, she would make sure that the entire Xianyuan family was buried with him. The Holy Church had already responded, so Zhang believed that her plan would come to fruition soon. Zhang silently planned. At this moment, a figure completely ignored Genryo's ban and forced his way into her courtyard. Genryo had set up a restriction on the entrance of the courtyard, allowing only people to leave and not enter. Thus, this person could only use all his strength to break through the restriction and try to force his way in. Soon, this commotion alerted the guards in the courtyard. Seeing that the guards were rushing over, the intruder turned around and shouted at them excitedly. Open the restriction. I want to see my mother. As soon as he appeared, the guards were stunned. He saw that this person was wearing a white short-sleeved shirt on his upper body and a pair of ripped jeans on his lower body. Coupled with his short hair, he looked somewhat out of place with the surrounding environment. His attire was a little strange. After careful observation, the guards finally dared to confirm that the person in front of them was the long-missing second young master. Second young master really came back. What are you waiting for? Hurry up. Seeing that everyone was hesitating, Cheng Hua no longer bothered with them. He looked around and found that the secret key to open the restriction was on one of the guards' waist. He walked over to the person and snatched the key. The guard instinctively wanted to stop him, but he was instantly intimidated by his fierce glare. How could this person not be the second young master? Seeing Cheng Hua swagger into the courtyard, the guard in charge of keeping the secret key seemed to have suddenly thought of something. He couldn't help but shiver, and then, with a face full of excitement, he shouted, Quick, report to the master. Second young master is back. Cheng Hua's return was like a stone heavily smashed into the water. As the restriction was opened, Zhang finally heard the commotion outside. She frowned and opened the door. Just as she was about to scold him, she unexpectedly saw the figure that made her worried the moment she raised her head. Mother, I'm back. When Cheng Hua saw that Zhang had come out, he immediately knelt on the ground and bowed. At that moment, Zhang felt as if she was struck by lightning. She had an expression of disbelief on her face as she stood there in a daze for a full 3 seconds. Then, she subconsciously cried out in shock, Hua. Mother, it's me. I'm back. Hua, it's really you? Come here quickly. Let Mother take a good look at you. The scene of mother and son reuniting after such a long time was really touching. Zhang quickly walked forward and helped Cheng Hua up. Then, the mother and son hugged each other tightly. They were so emotional that they couldn't speak. After a long while, Zhang finally suppressed the excitement in her heart. Then, with a concerned expression, she asked, "Fortunately, the immortal emperor protected me. I didn't have to send off my son just now." After experiencing so many things on Earth, Cheng Hua had matured a lot. He had learned many things from Qin Shi, including kinship. How could Zhang not treat him as well as how Qin Shi treated Nian? How great and selfless was this kind of love? Every time he thought of this, Cheng Hua couldn't wait to rush back to the Supreme Palace enclosure. He only hoped that he could use his filial piety to comfort his mother's silent concern for him all these years. As the saying goes, a tree wants to be still, but the wind won't stop. A child wants to be raised, but his parents won't wait. Now he was finally back. "I'm unfilial and made mother worry." It's fine. It's good that you're back." Zhang looked at Cheng Hua up and down. After making sure that he was not hurt, she asked happily, "Hua, didn't you go to the Tianshu ruins?" This. Cheng Hua naturally understood what Zhang was worried about. So, he immediately smiled and replied, "Mother, I came back especially to celebrate your birthday." Zhang seemed to want to say something else. Seeing this, Cheng Hua directly held her arm and said with a smile, "Let's go. I'll help you back to the house first. Then I'll tell you what happened in detail." The mother and son returned to the room. Then, under Zhang's incredulous gaze, Cheng Hua recounted his experience during this period of time in detail. "You mean, after you met Mr. Chen, not only did he not kill you, and he even took the initiative to accept you as his disciple?" After listening to Cheng Hua's story, the expression on Zhang's face was very interesting. Mr. Chen's prestige was now a gold-plated signboard in the Supreme Palace enclosure. Everyone said that the Tianshu ruins were a forbidden area and that trespassers would die. Who would have thought that Cheng Hua not only did not lose his life after trespassing into the Tianshu ruins, but also profited from the disaster and formed a good relationship with Mr. Chen? Mother, you might not understand. Mr. Chen did not accept me as his disciple. He only let me live in his house. When he was free, he would give me a few pointers. In order not to worry his mother, Cheng Hua concealed most of the facts. He did not mention Qin Shueching at all, so Zhang mistakenly thought that he had been accepted as a disciple by Qin Shi. Even if it was only a few pointers, it was still pointers from Zhizun. Mr. Chen is a peerless master who can defeat the 4 perfected masters alone. "Hua, are you? You've bumped into a great opportunity." Zhang was very excited. Who knew what kind of great luck Cheng Hua had had to be lucky enough to become Zhizun's disciple? Looking at her son, who was becoming more mature and steady, Zhang could not help but smile from the bottom of her heart. But immediately after, she seemed to have suddenly thought of something terrible, and a trace of worry flashed across her eyes. Cheng Hua's return was indeed a great thing. But what should she do with the Holy Church? Unilaterally break the contract? Would she dare? Thinking of this, Zhang's heart could not help but sink, and she instantly became a little worried. Cheng Hua was immersed in the joy of reuniting with his mother, so he did not notice the strange look on Zhang's face. He thought that Zhang was blaming him for trespassing on the Tianshu ruins, so he was thinking of something to say to make his mother happy. But at this moment, there was a sudden commotion outside the courtyard. A large group of people was seen hurrying towards Zhang's room. The leader was Genrio. Other than Cheng Hua's elder brother, Genyuan Jingqi, who was with him, there was also the current head of the Xianyuan family, Xianyuan Wuwang. Chapter 5:10. Outside the courtyard. The head of the family and the 8 elders arrived together. From this, it could be seen how shocking the news of Cheng Hua coming back alive from the Tianshu ruins was. "Where is he?" Xianyuan Wuwang looked to be about 60 years old. He was wearing an exquisite dark green robe with a simple jade pendant hanging from his waist. It was obvious that he was the one with the highest status in the group. This was Genrio's courtyard. Although Xianyuan Wuwang was the head of the family, the servants did not recognize him. After all, there was no television in the Supreme Palace enclosure. The guard didn't know Xianyuan Wuwang, but he vaguely recognized a few of the 8 elders. Therefore, when he heard Xianyuan Wuwang's seemingly random question, the guard was stunned. He didn't know how to answer at all. Seeing this, Genryo immediately walked out from the back of the group and quickly scolded in a low voice. "Fool! The head of the family is asking you a question. Why aren't you answering? Where did Changhua go?" After hearing the head of the family scolding, the guard replied with a look of realization. "Master, the second young master has been staying in the second madam's room ever since he came back. He did not go anywhere. All right, get out of here." The Xianyuan family was very large. If one had to describe it, the Xianyuan family could be considered a county. The head of the family was the county head, and the 8 elders were the mayors of the various towns. Now that the county head was here, it was understandable that the servants were slightly negligent. Although Genryo was very impressive all day, in front of the head of the family, he was very much like a bootlicker who only knew how to nod his head and bow his head. And this was the specialty of the Supreme Palace enclosure. That was the feudal hierarchy. Under the rules of this system, the head of the family's authority could not be challenged. Fortunately, Xianyuan Wuwang seemed to be in a good mood today. Therefore, after hearing the guard's answer, Xianyuan Wuwang did not show any intention of blaming him. After casually waving his hand, he strode into the courtyard. When his entourage saw this, they all followed behind him and swarmed into the courtyard like a swarm of bees. At this time, Changhua also heard the commotion outside the house. After signaling his mother not to get up, he walked to the door and pushed it open. At that moment, everyone's eyes were focused on him. This was Genryo's youngest son, Xianyuan Changhua, a little brat who hadn't even had a coronation ceremony. If not for the fact that Changhua had returned alive from the Tianshu ruins, most of the people present would have forgotten that Genryo had such an outstanding son. Why aren't you kneeling down? According to the customs of the Supreme Palace enclosure, a crowning ceremony would be held at the age of 20, which was the so-called coming-of-age ceremony. Before the crowning ceremony was held, juniors like Changhua did not even have the right to step into the ancestral hall of the clan. In the past, during the clan meeting, Changhua often ran outside with his peers to peek at the meeting. Therefore, he knew the head of the family and the other elders. Therefore, after hearing Genryo's reminder, Changhua immediately stopped on the steps and then bowed to the people in the courtyard. He clasped his fist and bowed. Changhua is here to greet the head of the family, father, and elders. There was nothing wrong with Chenghua's words. However, his behavior was obviously very problematic. In front of the head of the family, as a junior, how could Changhua not kneel? This was a great crime of disrespect. Genryo saw all of this, but as a father, he could only be anxious at the side and did not dare to say anything to remind him. Could it be that he had to remind the head of the family to punish Changhua for his great disrespect? Genryo was very anxious in his heart. That was because he did not know that Changhua had changed. Changhua had been by Qinshi's side for too long and had also lived for a long time in modern society. Therefore, unknowingly, Chenghua's understanding of this world had undergone a great change. The two of them are also human. Everyone is equal. It's just a meal. What's the big deal? Come. Sit down and eat together. Try my cooking. Qin Shueching did not allow the two of them to take half a step into the inner courtyard, but Qinshi opened his mouth and let the two of them directly sit at the dining table. This was just a small matter, but this small matter left an extremely deep impression on Changhua. From the daily diet to the leisure time, Qinshi's every move affected him and Yiji almost all the time. The reason why they did not notice anything unusual in the past was that the two of them had not returned to the Supreme Palace enclosure yet. It was also because of this that when Changhua returned this time, he realized that he seemed to be somewhat out of tune with the things around him. It was not that he did not know etiquette. It was purely that he did not want to kneel. Why are you kneeling? Stand up. Haven't you heard that men have gold under their knees? Stand up straight for me. At this moment, Chenghua's mind was filled with a myriad of thoughts. So much so that he even started to miss Earth. Xianyuan Wang did not know what Chenghua was thinking. Moreover, he did not know what Chenghua was thinking at all. Yuan Liang, lead the way. Let's talk somewhere else. Xianyuan Wang came here today with a purpose, so he did not want to waste too much time on these trivial matters. At his command, the master let Genrio lead everyone to sit in the main hall of the courtyard one by one. After that, in front of everyone present, Chenghua repeated everything he had just said to Zhang. His reaction was more or less the same as Zhang's. After everyone heard that Chenghua had been living in Mr. Chen's house all this time, the expressions on their faces were as interesting as it could be. After Chenghua roughly recounted his experience, he stood to the side and quietly waited for the master to ask questions. After pondering for a while, the master frowned and asked softly, "In other words, Mr. Chen has already taken you in?" It was no wonder that everyone understood this. After all, the Supreme Palace enclosure was not Earth. Other than Qin Shi, who would take a captive in their own house and provide them with good food and drinks. Master, Mr. Chen did not take me in as a disciple. He just let me live in his house and gave me a few pointers when he was free. Chenghua tried his best to explain. Hearing this, Xianyuan Wuang replied with a look of sudden realization. "I think it's because your cultivation levels are too low. Mr. Chen was afraid that you two would embarrass him, so he didn't give you a master and disciple status. If that's the case, you really can't claim to be his disciple." As soon as this was said, the 8 elders suddenly seemed to have figured something out. They could not help but nod in agreement. "Master, you're right." Seeing that this misunderstanding was getting bigger and bigger, Chenghua hesitated for a moment, but in the end, he forced himself to swallow the words that had already been on the tip of his tongue. Anyway, there was nothing wrong with being Mr. Chen's disciple. Since everyone had to understand it this way, he could only let it be. At worst, he would go back and explain it to Mr. Chen properly. Anyway, he did not use Mr. Chen's name to swindle people everywhere. Chenghua believed that he had a clear conscience, so he did not dwell on this issue any longer. Since Xianyuan Wang had asked what he wanted to ask and understood what he needed to understand, Chenghua guessed that it was time for them to leave, so he tactfully excused himself and left the main hall. Of course, he did not go far. Instead, he waited silently outside the house so that he could send the elders off later. Chenghua stood outside the door and waited, bored to death. However, at this moment, his name suddenly rang out in the main hall. "Yuan Liang, you really have a good son. This child is called Chenghua, right? What are his birth characters? Is he betrothed now?" "Coincidentally, I have a niece. She's 16 years old and has yet to be betrothed. I wonder, Yuan Liang, are you willing to become my in-laws?" At that moment, Chenghua felt as if a basin of cold water had been poured over him from head to toe. Before Genrio could even open his mouth to reply, he rushed into the main hall as if he had been electrocuted. Then, in front of the master, he shouted at everyone, "No!" Chapter 511.
No.
Chenghua's sudden intrusion instantly interrupted everyone's conversation. Looking at his nervous and agitated expression, the Patriarch did not directly reprimand him for his lack of manners. Instead, he asked with a smile, "Why not?" At that moment, everyone's eyes were focused on Chenghua. That's right, why not? As the cultivation of an immortal cultivator increased, the probability of having children would gradually decline. Therefore, immortal cultivators would usually try to get married and have children as soon as possible before they made a major breakthrough in their cultivation, so as to avoid the tragedy of having no one to send them off in the future. Even young people like Chenghua, who had not yet had a coronation ceremony, were mostly already married at this age. The meaning of life was to reproduce and multiply. In the words of the ancient people, there were 3 ways to be unfilial, and the worst was to have no descendants. Because his eldest brother, Genuan Jingqi, had already gotten married and had 2 sons, Genryo did not urge Cheng-Hua to get married and have children. He had originally planned to wait until after Cheng-Hua's coronation ceremony to find a good family for Cheng-Hua. Who would have thought that, after Cheng-Hua's trip to the Tianshu ruins, he had become a hot commodity in everyone's eyes. In addition to a few elders who expressed their desire to become in-laws with him, it seemed that even the Patriarch had this intention. Since ancient times, regardless of the social system, marriage was the most common way to establish relations. Since Cheng-Hua had the title of Supreme Disciple, wouldn't a marriage alliance with him mean that they would suddenly have a huge backer behind them? Even if they accidentally provoked the 4 great spiritual masters of the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven in the future, the 4 great spiritual masters would probably be a little more lenient on account of Great Supreme Master Chen. Therefore, even if Cheng-Hua's behavior was a little rude, no one had the intention to blame him. Instead, they smiled and sized up Cheng-Hua. After hearing the Patriarch's question, Cheng-Hua could not help but be stunned. He did not know why he objected to this suggestion. After all, cultivators were different from mortals. It would not be an exaggeration to describe the life of an immortal cultivator as a wandering and magnificent life. For immortal cultivators, the concept of home was more like an organization that they could rely on, since a man could have 3 wives and 4 concubines. In other words, a woman could naturally have 3,000 male companions. The so-called love was stronger than gold and unswerving until death. This kind of thing did not work in the Supreme Palace enclosure at all. Cheng-Hua hesitated, not knowing how to answer the Patriarch's question. Seeing this, the clan head laughed and said, "Could it be that you already have someone in mind? Which family are you from? If you don't mind, this old man can be a matchmaker for you." After hearing the Patriarch's words, Cheng-Hua couldn't help but think of a cold and aloof figure. However, as that figure became clearer and clearer in his mind, Cheng-Hua couldn't help but shudder. Then he quickly replied, "Thank you for your concern, Patriarch. It's not like I have someone in mind. It's just that. At this point, Cheng-Hua couldn't help but pause for a moment. Then, as if he suddenly thought of something, he couldn't help but quickly add, "It's just that I haven't reached the age of 1 yet. That's why I haven't considered the personal matters of my children before. Now that I've suddenly heard the elders mention this matter, I can't help but feel a little uneasy in my heart. I hope the elders won't blame me." Since they were talking about marriage, Cheng-Hua naturally had to act like a junior. Anyway, they were all family. There was nothing wrong with him calling himself the grandson in front of the Patriarch. Using the reason that he was underage, Cheng-Hua tactfully rejected the good intentions of the elders. But what he didn't expect was, after hearing his words, the Patriarch still laughed and said, "The coronation ceremony is just a kind of ceremony. It just so happens that tomorrow is the 15th of the first lunar month. When the time comes, come to the ancestral temple, and this old man will personally crown you. How about it?" Because there were too many people in the Xianyuan family, the coronation ceremony didn't happen immediately after the age of 20. Instead, it had to be done in batches. Usually, it would be chosen at an auspicious time, and the elders and deacons would perform the ceremony for the juniors. The higher the status of the person in the family, the more grand the coronation ceremony would be. For Cheng-Hua to have the Patriarch personally crown him in the ancestral temple was already a privilege that only the direct bloodline of the Xianyuan family could enjoy. Genryo relied on his cultivation to become one of the 8 elders. So, in terms of bloodline, Cheng-Hua was far from being qualified to enter the ancestral temple. Therefore, it could be said that the Patriarch of the Xianyuan family was giving Qin Shi enough face. Seeing that the Patriarch had said so, the elders all nodded in agreement. Seeing this, Cheng-Hua seemed to be a little unwilling to give up and said, "When I left Tianshu, I promised Mr. Chen that I would only be back for 7 days. So, this marriage," Cheng-Hua struggled hard. However, before he could finish his words, the Patriarch interrupted him. 7 days? That's enough. When your wedding is over, I'll send someone to escort you all the way back to Tianshu. How about that? Let's settle this matter then. Yuan Liang, I'll leave this matter to you. Tomorrow morning, I'll perform the coronation ceremony for your good son at the ancestral temple. There was no room for negotiation at all. After saying this, the Patriarch left the courtyard with his people. Only a dumbfounded Chonghua was left behind, as well as his excited old father. Coronation ceremony, marriage. At the same time, the status of the family rose sharply. Ever since Chonghua and Yiji returned home, everything they experienced was so similar. The Tuoba family had already fallen. So, how could the Xianyuan family and the Dongfeng family, who were also the three major families of Ningzhou, not be prepared at all? No matter what the relationship between the two of them and Mr. Chen. In short, it would not be wrong to please the two of them. Therefore, after the two of them went through a series of friendly greetings, they were pushed into the ancestral temple in a daze under the gaze of thousands of people. From the moment the two patriarchs personally held the coronation ceremony for the two of them, Chonghua and Yiji officially set foot on the peak of their lives. It felt like a dream. Everything came so suddenly. In a daze, the two teenagers were in their own ancestral temples. At the same time, they put on the red and black crowns that were unique to adults. The ceremony is complete. Bow to the ancestors. As the ceremony was completed, there was a burst of lively cheers outside the ancestral temples of the Xianyuan and Dongfeng families. People couldn't help but cheer for the crowns. It was as if there was only joy left in the world. However, no one would have thought, just as the two of them were about to complete their coronation ceremony, an earth-shattering sound suddenly came from the horizon.
Boom.
In an instant, lightning flashed and thunder rumbled. Evil wind blew. Chapter 5:12. The sudden turn of events alarmed everyone. The sun was still shining brightly earlier, but in the blink of an eye, the sky in the distance had become so gloomy that it was about to rain. Seeing that a storm was about to come, the people outside the ancestral temple could not help but whisper to each other. What's going on? The weather is so abnormal. Did something big happen in the jade, clear grotto heaven? Like the Great World, there were no stars near the Supreme Palace enclosure, so the changes in the weather and the movement of the sun and moon were all controlled by the formation. The core of the Supreme Palace enclosure's formation was in the jade clear grotto heaven. Now that the weather had suddenly changed, the first reaction of the people present was to guess if something had happened in the jade clear grotto heaven. Thick black clouds covered the entire sky, and the sky was as dark as ink that had dripped into water. Looking from afar, the black clouds surged over one after another, like the ferocious and terrifying faces of monsters. Like the low growl of a vicious dog before it pounced on its prey, the thunder in the sky accumulated power for a while before it suddenly burst out with an earth-shattering sound. Rumble, rumble. In an instant, the thunder rumbled, and the wind howled. In front of such a terrifying scene, no one had any intention of hiding. Instead, they all looked up at the distant sky. In the ancestral temple, the moment Xianyuan Wuang heard the thunder, he stopped the warning and blessing he was about to say to Chonghua. Instead, he quickly walked out of the ancestral temple with a serious face. When the 8 elders saw this, they all followed behind him and walked out of the ancestral temple. Chonghua was supposed to be the main character of today's ceremony. However, the moment the thunder sounded, he completely became a side character that no one cared about. Seeing that no one cared about him, Chonghua did not bother to care about the complicated etiquette. He directly took off the white crown on his head and hugged it in his arms. Then, he quietly moved to Genrio's side. Father, did something big happen? The Patriarch and the 8 grand elders stood proudly on the steps facing the demonic wind. After hearing Chonghua's question, Genrio frowned and glared at him. He then quickly scolded him in a low voice, silence. Oh, okay. Chonghua had never seen such a scene before. Therefore, when he heard Genrio's reprimand, he could only shrink his head in confusion and obediently stand behind the crowd, not daring to make any noise. Rumble, rumble. The sound of rolling thunder reverberated in the air. One after another, There was not a single moment of rest. It lasted for about 2 minutes before the deafening thunder gradually subsided. What's going on? Like Changhua, most of the young people outside the ancestral temple had blank looks on their faces. They had no idea what had just happened. Changhua stole a glance at his father. He realized that his father's expression was somewhat strange. There was a hint of nervousness, excitement, and even a hint of excitement. Could it be something good was about to happen? In the past, Changhua would not have the right to stand on the steps outside the ancestral temple. Today, he had a rare opportunity to do so. Naturally, he wanted to experience the feeling of standing at the top. However, at this moment, the Patriarch of the Xianyuan family and the 8 grand elders, who were standing at the front, suddenly knelt on one knee and shouted in unison, "Yes, Zhenren." Seeing this, Changhua was stunned. This was because he had no idea what had just happened. Seeing the Patriarch of the Xianyuan family and the 8 grand elders kneeling on the ground, Changhua was stunned for a moment. He could only follow suit and kneel down immediately. However, the moment he knelt down, the Patriarch of the Xianyuan family and the 8 grand elders stood up again. This was great. Changhua did not know whether he should kneel or stand now. Forget it. This is fate. It can't be changed. Yuan Liang explained to this child first. If Mr. Chen wants to blame someone in the future, I don't think he will be the one to blame. The dark clouds in the sky did not disperse, and the thunder stopped. The Patriarch of the Xianyuan family looked at Changhua with a complicated expression and shook his head gently. Then, he led the rest of the elders back to the ancestral temple. Explain? Explain what? Hearing this, Changhua could not help but feel confused. He was about to ask when Genrio's voice suddenly rang in his head. It was a voice transmission. His father was transmitting a voice transmission to him. After listening to Genrio's explanation, Changhua finally understood what had just happened. So the thunder just now was not a natural phenomenon. It was caused by the thunderdrum of the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven. The so-called thunderdrum was a special method used by the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven to transmit information to the various forces in the Supreme Palace enclosure. It was roughly equivalent to the radio station on Earth, and it was the encrypted kind. Only when one's cultivation reached a certain level could they hear the message that the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven wanted to transmit from the thunder. The reason why the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven suddenly sounded the thunderdrum today was completely because a grand event that happened once in 100 years was coming. What was a grand event? The meeting of the 3 enclosures was a grand event. Changhua had heard many rumors about the 3 enclosures since he was young. The so-called 3 enclosures were the Supreme Palace enclosure, the Crepe Myrtle enclosure, and the Heavenly Market enclosure. Legend had it that a long time ago, the 3 enclosures were originally a complete planet. Later on, something happened that caused the planet to be torn apart and turned into the 3 enclosures of today. Like the Supreme Palace enclosure, the Crepe Myrtle enclosure and the Heavenly Market enclosure were also plate-shaped landmasses that had been drifting in this vast universe for thousands of years. Because there were no stars to guide them, there was no trace of the 3 enclosures' whereabouts. The Supreme Palace enclosure was now near the solar system. Perhaps the Supreme Palace enclosure was still on the other side of the Milky Way 100,000 years ago. The 3 enclosures would meet once every 100 years, and the principle of its operation was still unknown. According to the speculation of a senior expert in the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven, the reason why the 3 enclosures would meet at regular intervals should be related to the arrangements left behind by the ancient powerhouses. In other words, the 3 enclosures were still hiding some shocking secrets that had not been discovered by anyone. In order to uncover this secret, since the establishment of the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven, its successive sect masters had been secretly searching for the truth. After various efforts, they finally found a clue. This clue came from Great Illusionary Land. Changhua knew about the 3 enclosures, but he had never heard of the Great Illusionary Land. Therefore, after hearing this term, he could not help but interrupt Genrio and ask directly, "Father, I still don't understand what you mean." This great illusionary land. What does it have to do with me? Hearing this, a meaningful smile suddenly appeared on Genrio's face. He reached out and patted Cheng Hua's shoulder, then whispered in Cheng Hua's ear, Hua, prepare well, your opportunity is here. Chapter 5:13. For a junior like Cheng Hua, the Great Illusionary Land was an extremely unfamiliar term. However, for existences like Genrio and even the Xianyuan family head, the Great Illusionary Land was a good place that symbolized opportunities and fortuitous encounters. Although the Great Illusionary Land was a specific name, it did not have a specific address. That was because the address it appeared at every time was not fixed. The Great Illusionary Land would only appear briefly in a thick fog on the day when the three enclosures converged. Every 100 years, the three enclosures would gradually get closer and more or less joined together under the influence of an unknown force. Just like Asia, America, and Europe, if a sea was filled in between the three enclosures, then one could roughly see its original appearance when looking from afar in the starry sky. Once upon a time, it was also a complete planet. Every time the three enclosures converged, the fluctuation of the spirit energy of heaven and earth would become unusually intense, so much so that the spirit energy would gradually form a fog that would gradually cover the entire sky. At this time, one only needed to follow the spirit energy all the way. The place with the densest spirit energy would be the place where the Great Illusionary Land appeared. Unlike the unknown dangers of the Tianshu ruins, the Great Illusionary Land had real benefits. Genrio had a deep understanding of this problem. After all, if he had not been lucky enough to obtain the qualifications to enter the Great Illusionary Land and obtained many benefits from it, then Genrio, who was only from a collateral bloodline, would not have been able to sit in the position of the 8 Great Elders. At this point, it was necessary to first mention the so-called social resources and class consolidation. In fact, whether it was Earth or the Great Illusionary Land, except for some lucky people who were favored by the heavens, it was actually very difficult for ordinary people to climb from the bottom of society to the top of society. The Great Illusionary Land did not have a college entrance examination, so the Great Illusionary Land was the only way for everyone to reach the top in one step. Once one entered the Great Illusionary Land, all the opportunities and fortuitous encounters were in front of one's eyes. But it was a pity. The Great Illusionary Land could only allow 3,000 people to enter at a time. 3,000 people sounded like a lot. However, if it was placed in the entire Great Illusionary Land, this number was too small. Just Ning State alone had the Xianyuan, Dongfang, and Tuoba families, as well as many slightly weaker mid-sized families. Moreover, besides the Ning Prefecture, there were still 8 other prefectures in the Supreme Palace enclosure that weren't inferior to the Ning Prefecture at all. Since everyone wanted to go in and get a share of the pie, then these 3,000 spots naturally needed to be properly distributed. Thus, with the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven taking the lead, the slots were accurately allocated to the various forces according to their overall strength. The thunderclap drum earlier was actually an announcement to the various great powers about the number of slots they would be able to obtain this time. This was the fundamental reason why Cheng Hua had never heard of the existence of the Great Illusionary Land before. The quota was limited. Therefore, the fewer people who knew about the existence of the Great Illusionary Realm, the better. Otherwise, wouldn't those bumpkins from small families rebel against the heavens and swarm into the Great Illusionary Realm to change their fates? Therefore, it could be said that this was a carnival for the upper class of the Supreme Palace enclosure, and it had nothing to do with the general public. It was probably because the Tuoba family had suffered a heavy blow a few days ago, so during the distribution this time, the Xianyuan family and the Dongfang family were both given 3 slots, one more than before. Regarding this, the Xianyuan family patriarch was naturally overjoyed, so he immediately returned to the ancestral temple and used the excuse of inspecting the cultivation progress of his clansmen as an excuse to launch a large clan meeting that involved the entire Xianyuan family. Although it was called a large clan meeting, it was actually a martial arts competition. Anyone whose cultivation was above the Golden Core realm and below the Yuanying realm could sign up. As long as one obtained the top 3, they would be allowed to enter the Great Illusionary Realm. What needed to be mentioned here was there was no requirement to enter the Great Illusionary Realm. Even the Yuanying and Soul Formation cultivators could enter at will. However, as long as one Soul Formation cultivator entered the Great Illusionary Realm, then the 3,000 spots would immediately be reduced to 2,000, or even less. According to past experience, it was basically certain that the benefits of entering the Great Illusionary Realm with 3,000 Golden Core cultivators were the greatest. Therefore, the Golden Core cultivators became the key targets of the various forces. Only the strongest among them were qualified to enter the Great Illusionary Realm. Cheng Hua's cultivation was only at the middle stage of the Golden Core realm. Logically speaking, he was not qualified to know the inside story in advance. Considering that his master was the great Supreme Qin, the Patriarch could not help but place high hopes on him. After all, he was the disciple of the Supreme Qin. Although his cultivation was slightly lower, with his actual combat ability he should not be too bad, right? However, nobody would have thought, after hearing Genrio's words, Cheng Hua said hesitantly, "Father, can I not participate?" "What?" Genrio looked as if he had seen a ghost. It should be noted that the reason why Cheng Hua's elder brother did not enter the Great Illusionary Realm back then was that there was no third spot, so he could only stay in the top 3. Now that there was an extra spot, Cheng Hua actually wanted to give it up directly? Was there a mistake? Thinking of this, Genrio only felt a surge of anger in his heart rushing to his head. However, considering that this matter could not be forced, after taking a deep breath, Genrio forced himself to calm down and said, "Why don't you want to participate?" "Mr. Qin only gave me 7 days." Seeing his father's unfriendly expression, Cheng Hua could only answer honestly, "After 7 days, I must return to Tianshu. Otherwise, with Mr. Chen's temperament, it's very likely that he will personally come to the Supreme Palace enclosure to ask me to return." After hearing the 3 words Mr. Qin, Genrio's eyelids twitched obviously. With the Tuoba family as an example, nobody dared to provoke Mr. Qin in Tianshu. However, was this really going to be a waste of this opportunity? Or you have to think carefully. Some people are willing to waste 100 years and force themselves to stay in this realm with the purpose of exploring the Great Illusionary Land. Although you are a disciple of a supreme being, what Mr. Qin can give you may not be as much as what the Great Illusionary Land can give you. When the 4 words Great Illusionary Land were mentioned, Genrio's face clearly flashed with a strange light. However, due to some unspoken agreement, he could not tell Cheng Hua what exactly was in the Great Illusionary Land. Moreover, are you so sure that you can easily win the first place and obtain a spot to enter the Great Illusionary Land? After hearing Genrio say this, Cheng Hua was stunned for a moment. That's right. Ever since he found out that he had to compete to obtain a spot, Cheng Hua's first reaction was that he could not participate. Otherwise, if he did not return to Tianshu on time, Mr. Qin would definitely be angry. In Cheng Hua's subconscious mind, as long as he participated in the clan meeting, then he would definitely be able to defeat everyone and successfully obtain the qualification to enter the Great Illusionary Land. He seemed to be a little too confident. Chapter 514. Due to the lack of time, the Patriarch immediately announced the start of the Great Clan meeting after receiving the news from the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven. This was a grand event that concerned the future of the Xian Yuan family. In this grand event, regardless of whether it was the Xian Yuan family's collateral bloodline, or the relatives who were related to the Xian Yuan family through marriage, or even some criminals who had violated the family rules, regardless of birth or background, as long as one's cultivation was above the Golden Core stage and below the Yuanying stage, one would be qualified to participate in the Great Clan meeting. Of course, most people did not know what the Great Clan meeting meant because the Great Illusionary Realm was too far away for them. But even so, everyone wanted to do their best in this Great Clan meeting and strive to get a good ranking. This grand event was not only related to the great illusionary realm, but also related to everyone's status in the family. Just like how ancient emperors would always pardon the world before they ascended the throne, at this moment, it did not matter whether one was born poor or guilty. As long as they could get a good ranking in the great clan meeting, they could use this opportunity to reverse their previous fate. It could be said that this was the true meaning. The fish leaped over the dragon's gate, and the sky was vast. Therefore, the great clan meeting was actually equivalent to Huaxia's college entrance exam. It was even fairer than the college entrance exam. Everything depended on one's strength. Qin Xueqing had never been to the great palace enclosure, so she did not know how much time would be wasted on the journey from Earth to the great palace enclosure. The so-called 7-day deadline was just something she said casually. Regarding this, Qin Shi was more magnanimous. Considering the long journey, when Cheng Hua and Yi Ji left, he even very considerately reminded them that the 7-day deadline would start from the day they reached home. Today was the second day after Cheng Hua's return. He originally wanted to go home and accompany his mother, but he did not expect that as soon as he got home, his schedule would be packed. He really did not have a moment to rest. Under Genrio's constant persuasion, Cheng Hua finally signed up for the great clan meeting after some hesitation. After all, it was rare for the clan gathering to be held, so he wanted to use this opportunity to see how much he had improved. If he didn't make any progress, he really wouldn't have the face to see Qin Shi. Under the constant urging of the Patriarch, the efficiency of the stewards in the clan instantly rose to the highest level. Therefore, in less than half a day's time, this highly anticipated clan gathering ushered in its first competition. Unlike many of the spectators, Cheng Hua did not show any excitement on his face. Instead, he stood beside the ring with a calm expression, silently watching the two parties fighting on the ring. It was as if everything had nothing to do with him. What we need to take note of here is, although the entry requirements were limited to those above the Golden Core stage and below the Yuanying stage, there was no age limit. The strength of an Aurus Core stage cultivator who had cultivated for 100 years and an Aurus Core stage cultivator who had cultivated for 500 years were naturally incomparable. Because of this, many of the old fellows who had been cultivating bitterly for their entire lives, but were still unable to enter the Yuanying realm, were extremely excited when they heard that the clan leader was going to hold a clan meeting. As long as they could achieve a certain result in the meeting, the clan would definitely notice them. At that time, wouldn't the Yuanying stage be just around the corner? Everyone wanted to do their best for their own future, so the ruthlessness of this clan meeting was far beyond everyone's expectations. Perhaps it was because they wanted to eliminate the weak as soon as possible. Therefore, in the previous few competitions, there was no real sense of parity. Instead, most of the time, it was peak Aurus Core stage cultivators against early Aurus Core stage cultivators. Such a deliberate arrangement not only ensured that the peak Aurus Core stage cultivators could enter the final round with the strongest form, but also eliminated the weak as quickly as possible. Why not? However, what was surprising was that, even if it was always early Aurus Core stage cultivators against peak Aurus Core stage cultivators, there had never been a situation where the early Aurus Core stage cultivators gave up without a fight. There were even a few times when the early Aurus Core stage cultivators almost made a comeback. So, what if they were peak Aurus Core stage cultivators? It was just a battle. What was there to be afraid of? Regardless of their cultivation level, everyone gave it their all in order to obtain a better ranking for themselves. If it wasn't for the clan meeting's explicit prohibition against self-detonating magic treasures, it was estimated that the arena would have been filled with crackling sounds. When night fell, Cheng Hua finally welcomed his first battle. His cultivation was at the middle Aurus Core stage. Now that even he was on the stage, it meant that the early Aurus Core stage cultivators had basically been eliminated, and it was time for the middle Aurus Core stage cultivators. Cheng Hua's opponent was an elder from a collateral branch. Because the news of Cheng Hua going to the Tianshu ruins was not publicized, most people did not know that he now had another identity. But even if he did not have the identity of the supreme disciple, Cheng Hua was still Genrio's second son. So when he just appeared, it caused a big commotion. The Patriarch seemed to be very interested in Chenghua's experience during this period, so he wanted to see what exactly he had learned under Qinshi. Therefore, after hearing the news of Chenghua's appearance, the Patriarch immediately led the 8 elders to the arena where Chenghua was. In the arena, Chenghua and the elders stood facing each other. The elder did not know Chenghua, but he had learned about Chenghua's identity from the onlookers, so he was extremely polite as soon as he came up. "I'm older than you, young master. Now that I have the honor of exchanging pointers with you, please make your move first." As he spoke, the old man took out his Dharma treasure. It was a simple long saber, and its rank was a 3rd-grade spirit treasure. At first glance, one could tell that it was a collection of the elders for many years. If Chenghua's phoenix perch scorched tail box was still there, then this long saber was naturally not a good item. According to the usual practice, the 2 sides should introduce their magic treasures before exchanging pointers. Therefore, the elder roughly introduced his long saber. He estimated that with Chenghua's identity, his 3rd-grade spirit treasure would not be good enough for him. Who would have thought, after hearing his introduction, Chenghua shook his head directly and then said calmly, "I won't use my magic treasure. Please make your move." At that moment, not only was the elder on the arena stunned, but even Genryo, who was flying in the sky, was also surprised. How could this child be so arrogant? Not using his phoenix perch scorched tail box, he actually wanted to fight against a peak golden elixir with his bare hands? Could a supreme disciple be so arrogant? Regarding this question, Genryo had wronged Chenghua. Because he did not know, not using magic treasures had long been a tradition of the Sai courtyard. The one who really made Chenghua decide not to rely on magic treasures to fight was actually not Qin Xueqing, who had entered the Dao through martial arts, but Qinshi. As the saying went, loud voices come from afar, not from the autumn wind. You are just ordinary people. How can you understand great Supreme Master Chen's painstaking efforts? Chapter 5:15. Chenghua had also consulted Chen Shi many times when he was in a good mood regarding cultivation. Chen Shi was a supreme martial artist, so his answers were unquestionable truth to Chenghua. There were 8 methods of immortals: pills, talismans, weapon arrays, and witchcraft. Earth originally lacked the corresponding inheritance and materials, so there were very few rare and strange magic treasures. Even if there were 1 or 2, most of them were old antiques passed down from ancient times. The Supreme Palace enclosure was different from Earth. It had not experienced many changes, so compared to Earth, which lacked the inheritance of the 8 methods, the Supreme Palace enclosure was actually more like the United States, where weapons were not banned. Magic treasures were just consumer goods that could be seen everywhere. This was the reason why Qin Xueqing did not like to use magic treasures. On one hand, it was because she entered the Dao through martial arts, and her body was her most powerful weapon. On the other hand, it was completely because she had never come into contact with magic treasures. Since she had never come into contact with them, how could she understand the benefits? If it was normal that Qin Xueqing did not like to use magic treasures, then Qinshi, who also did not like to use magic treasures, was obviously a little abnormal. Chenghua had always thought that if the phoenix perch scorched tail box was still in his hands, Qin Xueqing could not possibly be his opponent. Therefore, after he was beaten up by Qin Xueqing, he had a discussion with Qinshi about whether magic treasures were important or not. The result was naturally very obvious. From then on, Chenghua was infected with the bad habit of not liking to use magic treasures. In fact, with Qinshi's current cultivation, if he really wanted to obtain a magic treasure that suited him, it would not be difficult at all. He did not even need to spend much effort to find the materials. He only needed to take a stroll in the jade clear cave heaven with the title of Supreme Martial Artist Tianshu. There were so many treasures in there, so why couldn't he just casually pick one? As long as it was not some sect guarding treasure, would the 4 perfected masters not even give this little face? So, in the end, it was just that Qinshi himself did not want it. Just like the words he always said, "There is no other reason other than the sword in your heart." Magic treasures were indeed very useful. Some magic treasures were even more powerful than the cultivator's own strength. But even so, what could they do? No matter how strong the magic treasure in his hand was, this power was still just an external force. Personal strength was the foundation of an immortal cultivator. Blindly pursuing the grade of magic treasures and neglecting one's own strength, wasn't such behavior already inferior? You don't understand? It's fine. Let me ask you the simplest question. Didn't you have a 9th grade spirit treasure previously? If the current you with your bare hands were to face the you who used to have a 9th grade spirit treasure, then do you think, which period would you be more powerful? With that, Chunxi smiled mysteriously and patted Cheng Hua's shoulder. This scene also left a deep impression on Cheng Hua. Actually, this thing is just like dating.
The one that suits you is the best.
Though the Phoenix Perch Scorched Tail box is good, it does not suit you. Also, if you rely too much on external forces, other than being able to kill a few more people, it does not help your cultivation at all. So, before you truly find a Dharma treasure that suits you, I suggest that you be yourself first. After Chen Shi's advice, Cheng Hua finally understood. This sword, it was both in his hand and in his heart. When he did not have a sword in his hand, it was time for him to take out the sword in his heart. No magic treasures? After hearing Cheng Hua's words, the elder's eyes flashed with joy. One had to know that the competition schedule of the clan gathering was very tight. The competition was basically one after another. There was not enough time to rest and recuperate. If he went through a fierce battle right after he appeared, then even if he could successfully enter the final round, his performance would be greatly reduced. And if he could obtain victory at the lowest cost and then face opponents of the same level in his peak state, his chances of winning would naturally increase by 30%. To the elder, the clan gathering was the only chance for him to make a comeback. Therefore, just as Cheng Hua finished speaking, the elder pretended to be in a difficult position and replied, "Since young master is so confident, I can only accept your favor. Young master, be careful. I am about to make my move. This move is called Wave Fanyan. Please enlighten me, young master." Even though the old man was calling himself a young master, the long saber in his hand danced with vigor and vigor. Although this move was called Wave Fanyan, it had nothing to do with water. As he waved the long saber in his hand, a streak of fire covered half of the arena like a cloud in the evening. This brat, how can he be so careless? In midair, seeing the elder attack with all his might, Genryo was so angry that he trembled. Middle stage golden elixir against peak stage golden elixir. His opponent had clearly allowed him to make the first move, but Cheng Hua insisted on being careless. Not only did he not use his Dharma treasure, he even allowed the elder to make the first move. What was this if not courting death? If not for the clan leader beside him, Genryo would have even appeared and reprimanded Cheng Hua. Genryo was extremely anxious, but the clan leader was extremely calm. Chapter 516. Punching the Nanshan nursing home and kicking the Beihai kindergarten. Wasn't such an absurd and ridiculous scene happening right in front of everyone's eyes? Cheng Hua had almost perfectly inherited Qin Xueqing's lifelong learning. Therefore, as soon as this move, which was very characteristic of Earth, appeared, it immediately caused a big sensation in the crowd. Since the day the 3 enclosures split apart, no one had ever seen such a shameless and strange move. Shouldn't the so-called immortal cultivators be like the immortals in the myths and legends, walking, sitting, and lying, showing the true colors of immortals? Immortals couldn't be like street gangsters, chasing each other with clubs and machetes, right? Therefore, when immortal cultivators fought with each other, most of them would only use magic treasures or spells to fight from a long distance. Here, ancient military formations could be used as an example in a war. It wasn't just about which side had more people. If the cultivation of immortal cultivators was compared to the number of soldiers, then the magic treasures and moves they used when fighting were the tactical strategies arranged by the commander of the military formation. On the battlefield, the situation was changing rapidly. There were always many factors that could affect the outcome of a battle. Even if one side had few soldiers and was far less powerful than the opponent before the real fight, no one could guarantee that the weak side would lose. The family had hoped that Cheng Hua could bring him a certain surprise. But what he never expected was Cheng Hua not only brought him a surprise, but also a certain degree of surprise. Even if Cheng Hua had used tricks such as straw boats to borrow arrows and fire to achieve a narrow victory, the family head wouldn't be surprised at all. After all, Cheng Hua was the disciple of the Supreme Being. However, Cheng Hua had used a completely unimaginable way to win the battle in a one-sided manner. My younger brother, Zhang Ida, took the head of a general among millions of soldiers as easily as taking something out of his pocket. He single-handedly attacked the enemy's den. This was Cheng Hua's tactic. There weren't so many flashy moves, and there weren't so many strange movements. There were only punches to the flesh, as well as repeated attacks that accurately hit the same position. And under this storm-like attack, soon, the old man's protective shield was broken.
Boom.
A strong gust of wind suddenly rose from the stage, and the old man's body was like a sandbag filled with cement, heavily smashing into the stage. From beginning to end, this unlucky peak Jindan stage cultivator had never fought back even once. On one hand, it was because the rules of the competition forbade the use of defensive treasures. On the other hand, it was completely because he didn't react in time. Cough, cough. Young master, you're so capable. This old man admits defeat. Looking at the expressionless Cheng Hua, the old man hesitated for a moment before shaking his head with a bitter smile. This was an arena competition. Methods such as self-detonating his golden core and burning his blood essence could not be used. Therefore, the moment the protective shield was broken, the old man had already lost the chance to make a comeback. Unless Cheng Hua was willing to give him time to adjust his breathing and wait until he was ready to fight again. Otherwise, if he continued to hold on, what awaited the old man was destined to be humiliation. Thank you for letting me win. Hearing the old man admit defeat, Cheng Hua cupped his fists and bowed to him, then slowly walked down the stage. When the audience below the stage saw Cheng Hua come down, they immediately divided into two lines and made a VIP passage for him. At that moment, the entire audience was silent. The crowd silently watched Cheng Hua. After his figure gradually disappeared into the distance, the crowd was like startled birds in the forest and began to discuss excitedly. What's going on? He won just like that? A middle Jindan stage cultivator against a peak Jindan stage cultivator, and he won so easily? What kind of moves did they use, did you understand? Why do I feel like I didn't see anything? Looking at the audience below who were fiercely discussing the battle situation, Xian Yuan Wuang suddenly couldn't help but laugh. Haha, Yuan Liang, your second son is really lucky. After saying that, without waiting for Genrio to reply, the family head had already left with an enigmatic smile on his face. Genrio looked at the stage below thoughtfully, but he suddenly had more expectations for this precious son of his. This was the move that the Supreme Being taught. It seemed simple, but it was very effective. Of course, with Genrio's cultivation, it was not difficult to see Cheng Hua's victory in this competition was mainly due to the point of winning by surprise. Presumably, his next opponent would be prepared in advance after hearing that Cheng Hua had such a strange technique, so it was basically impossible for him to catch them off guard again. He didn't know what kind of surprise Cheng Hua would bring to him in the next competition. Thinking of this, even Genrio, who had always been serious, showed a faint smile at this moment. His son had done well, and as the father, he also felt proud. Immortal cultivators did not need to rest. Therefore, from the moment it started, the gathering had to continue until the end. Following this, Cheng Hua went through another 2 rounds of competition. However, the opponents in these 2 matches were weaker than the old man from before. Therefore, Chong Hua did not spend much effort and easily defeated the two of them. Instead, he used the secret method of telepathy to send it directly to Chong Hua's ears. Obviously, this brother was very clear about Chong Hua's background. The reason why he was willing to talk nonsense with Chong Hua was actually entirely because of Sovereign Qin. Chong Hua was somewhat non-committal about this. It seemed like he was being looked down upon. It didn't matter. Let's see who's the real deal then. Therefore, Chong Hua didn't say anything more. He directly cupped his fists and bowed to Xianyuan Wuhan. Chong Hua, would Mr. Wuhan please enlighten me? Chong Hua's reaction seemed to be somewhat out of Xianyuan Wuhan's expectations. Therefore, after hearing his declaration of war, a faint smile immediately appeared on Xianyuan Wuhan's face.
Oh, come then.
The battle suddenly started just like that. Chong Hua's figure was like a ghost, and he instantly disappeared on the spot. Seeing that, Xianyuan Wuhan's reaction was completely different from the opponents that Chong Hua had encountered before. He didn't take out his own magic weapon. Instead, he imitated Chong Hua and went up to meet him with his bare hands. Both of their speeds were extremely fast. As soon as they came into contact, there was a series of bang 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 sounds of fists and feet colliding on the stage. In just a blink of an eye, the two of them had already exchanged a few blows. Although Chong Hua had already mentally prepared himself to a certain extent before this. But at this moment, only then did he truly understand how terrifying Xianyuan Wuhan was. Even though Xianyuan Wuhan hadn't learned martial arts before, he was actually able to rely on his own rich cultivation and some shallow experience that he had accumulated from watching the battle before the competition to firmly suppress Chong Hua. Chong Hua's movements were very fast, but Xianyuan Wuhan was even faster than him. Chong Hua's moves were very ingenious, but Xianyuan Wuhan was able to imitate him in the blink of an eye and return the favor in an instant. This was the true peak of Golden Elixir Realm. In terms of cultivation, in terms of experience, in terms of skills, Chong Hua was still too young. And under the suppression of such absolute strength, he was like an unlucky person who had fallen into a quagmire. The harder he struggled, the faster he sank. When Xianyuan Wuhan gradually adapted to Chong Hua's moves and gradually figured out some tricks from them, then Chong Hua wouldn't be far from failure. That was because he knew, regarding Chong Hua's current performance, the Patriarch was indeed somewhat disappointed. To be honest, if Chong Hua wasn't a sovereign disciple, he wouldn't even have the qualifications to exchange blows with Xianyuan Wuhan. No matter how the outside world slandered and insulted Xianyuan Wuhan, in the Patriarch's eyes, Xianyuan Wuhan would always be the person who had the most hope of breaking through to become a heavenly venerable after him. Outsiders didn't know the trick and only thought that Xianyuan Wuhan's potential had been squeezed dry. In reality, it was Xianyuan Wuhan himself who was unwilling to break through to become a Yuanying. In order to be able to repeatedly enter the great illusionary land, Xianyuan Wuhan had suppressed himself for 200 years. Even the Patriarch couldn't help but be amazed by such boldness. There aren't that many geniuses in the world to begin with, and all those who have appeared out of nowhere are those who have accumulated in the past. Compared to Xianyuan Wuhan, Chong Hua instantly became ordinary. As expected, after another 100 to 200 moves, Chong Hua accidentally revealed an extremely small flaw because of his lack of strength. Xianyuan Wuhan keenly found this flaw, so he grabbed the opportunity and directly hit Chong Hua's chest with a crushing punch.
Bam!
Accompanied by a muffled sound, a strong gust of wind blew on the stage. Chong Hua's body was like a sandbag, and he was directly sent flying 20 meters away by Xianyuan Wuhan's attack. After Xianyuan Wuhan punched again, he didn't continue to attack. Instead, he suddenly stopped and silently waited for Chong Hua to stand up from the ground again. Unlike the people below the stage who were sighing and lamenting, Cheng Hua appeared very relaxed. After Cheng Hua stood up from the ground, he politely cupped his fists and bowed to Xianyuan Wuhan. Then he said calmly, "Sir, you're very capable. I admit defeat." Although this punch didn't cause any substantial damage to Cheng Hua, he still admitted defeat very straightforwardly. After all, Xianyuan Wuhan didn't use any Dharma treasures or spells. He could actually easily defeat Cheng Hua with just a half-baked martial arts move that he learned on the spot. Even if he continued to fight, wouldn't he be humiliating himself? Anyway, Cheng Hua wasn't interested in the great illusionary land. Since he lost, then, he would just admit defeat straightforwardly. Perhaps because he was used to being trampled by Qin Shueching, Cheng Hua didn't care about winning or losing at all. After admitting defeat, he turned around and prepared to leave. However, just as Cheng Hua admitted defeat and left, Xianyuan Wuhan's voice suddenly sounded behind him. "I heard that Mr. Chen once fought against the four immortals of the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven by himself. So, I originally thought that this master of the heavenly pivot must have some great ability to maneuver unhindered and invincible. Who would have thought that after seeing him today, I would know that the rumors were also untrue?" At this point, Xianyuan Wuhan suddenly couldn't help but shake his head and laugh. "Supreme Being? That's all." Xianyuan Wuhan's voice was very soft, but his tone was full of mockery. It was obvious that he was implying something with these words. So, Cheng Hua immediately stopped in his tracks. He slowly turned around, and the expression on his face finally became serious. "I know. You said this just to provoke me to fight you with all my strength. But I still want to remind you, you can scold me, but you shouldn't have brought Mr. Chen into this." As he spoke, Cheng Hua stretched out his right hand. Then, without any movement from Cheng Hua, a long sword with a cold blue light appeared in his hand out of thin air.
Come on.
Don't you all want to know what I learned from Mr. Chen? Then I'll show you today. What exactly did I learn? He didn't know when it started, but the figure who smiled all day to make his daughter happy had become an absolutely inviolable existence in Cheng Hua's mind. Xianyuan Wuhan could say that he wasn't good at learning, but he definitely couldn't say that Mr. Chen's reputation was undeserved. Including Genrio, the Patriarch, the 8 elders, and Xianyuan Wuhan, who was in front of him at this moment, almost everyone was eager to know what peerless cultivation method Cheng Hua had learned from Qin Shi. Was the cultivation method used by a supreme being really that important? Thinking of this, Cheng Hua couldn't help but lower his head slightly to look at the long sword in his hand. In a trance, he saw the scene of Qin Shi holding the little fellow and standing in the courtyard with a smile on his face. Yes, Cheng Hua was very lucky. Others would lose their lives in vain if they went to the Tianshu ruins. Not only was he fine when he went to the Tianshu ruins, but he was also lucky enough to live with Supreme Qin for a period of time. But who would have thought that, during this period of time, what really benefited Cheng Hua was Mr. Chen's way of dealing with people. Qin Shi indeed didn't accept Cheng Hua as his disciple, and he had never even planned to do so. But in Cheng Hua's heart, Qin Shi was still half his master. It was just that he didn't dare to say it out loud. So, Xianyuan Wuhan could scold him, but he couldn't scold Mr. Chen. Otherwise, how could he explain his magnificent feat of fighting against 4 opponents in the Jade Pure Cave Heaven? Since Mr. Chen was so powerful, as his direct disciple, Cheng Hua should have learned something, right? The Patriarch had high hopes for Cheng Hua, so he sent Xianyuan Wuhan to test Cheng Hua. The result was just as the Patriarch had hoped. Cheng Hua was successfully enraged by Xianyuan Wuhan. Thus, he no longer held back, and his first move was a killing move. It was like pressing the shutter of a camera as a strong light flashed. Time suddenly stopped. Everyone felt their minds go blank. By the time they came back to their senses, Xianyuan Wuhan's tall and sturdy body that couldn't be considered to have landed directly flew backwards. Accompanied by a strong gust of wind, Xianyuan Wuhan fell heavily to the ground.
Puff.
There were no obvious wounds on Xianyuan Wuhan's body, but the violent impact still caused him some internal injuries, so he couldn't help but cough up a mouthful of blood. Cheng Hua-wen, looking at Xianyuan Wuhan, who fell heavily to the ground, everyone suddenly felt like they were dreaming. Are you satisfied now? This is a sword move that Mr. Chen taught me. However, Cheng Hua's aptitude is too low, and he can't master the trick, so he can only barely make a pose. In fact, that sword move just now had exhausted all of Cheng Hua's vital essence, but in order to protect Mr. Chen's supreme reputation, Cheng Hua could only hold on to his last breath and pretended to be calm as he declared this victory declaration. After saying that, Cheng Hua turned around and left very confidently. Looking at his back as he left, a thoughtful expression suddenly appeared on Xianyuan Wuhan's face. From the moment Cheng Hua waved the long sword in his hand, winning or losing this competition was no longer important. He not only proved himself, but also indirectly defended Mr. Chen's reputation. This sword move was indeed very powerful. But with the cultivation of the Patriarch and the 8 elders, how could they not see that Cheng Hua was already an arrow at the end of its flight at that time? Although Xianyuan Wuhan suffered internal injuries, he still had the ability to get up and fight again. Therefore, if they continued to fight, Cheng Hua might not even be able to take one move from Xianyuan Wuhan. However, this was only an internal competition within the family after all. Since Cheng Hua waved this sword move, then no matter what the result was, the Patriarch would definitely guarantee that he would be in the top 3. In fact, when Cheng Hua showed that sword move, even the Patriarch, who was watching the battle, could not help but be a little tempted. If he were to use such a miraculous sword technique, what kind of power would it display? Thinking of this, the Patriarch could not help but want Cheng Hua to hand over the sword technique. The name of this sword technique was very interesting. It was called Abundant Thought Sword Technique. The meaning was self-evident. Chun-Shi was too lazy to name it, so he used the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 as the order. The first style was called Sword 1, and the second style was called Sword 2. If not for the fact that he wanted to raise the level and show off a little, he would not even bother to use the traditional 1, 2, and 3. After all, wouldn't Sword 1, Sword 2, and Sword 3 be easier to write? Let's talk about it. Recently, many authors are using the main characters group writing method. I also want to try it, so there is this plot. Actually, the story is still the same story, but the way it is written is different. If it was from Chun-Shi's point of view, then this story would be written in the future, and the development of the story would also be different. Maybe it's because my writing is not good enough, so the ending is not very good, so sad, but I will correct it. Humans always grow strong through stumbles. You just have to get used to it. His pair of eagle-like eyes were even more unbridled as they scanned the surroundings. With his current nervous appearance, those who didn't know better would probably think that he was transporting banknotes. By daddy, by mommy. Unlike Chun-Shi's vigilance, the little fellow behaved as usual, as if yesterday's love letter incident did not put too much of a psychological burden on her. Therefore, after she smiled and waved goodbye to her parents, she ran into the school gate like a wisp of smoke. As the class monitor, she naturally had to set an example. Therefore, she had to be the first to sit in the classroom before her classmates arrived. Nian Nian had already woken up early enough, but there were still many children in the class who woke up earlier than her. It was not that these children were more diligent than her, but because most of these children lived far away, coupled with the fact that the morning rush hour in Shangjing was too congested, their parents had no choice but to send their children to school early every day and then rush to work. Living in Shangjing was really not easy. How could a rich second generation like Nian Nian understand the hardships? As usual, when Nian Nian arrived at the classroom, there were already a lot of people sitting sparsely in the classroom. Some children gathered together and chatted about games, while others chased and played at the back of the classroom. Not sure who shouted, "Class monitor is here," but a few mischievous children stopped what they were doing and returned to their seats. Looking at this situation, Nian Nian, the class monitor, was almost synonymous with the teacher. Nian Nian was very satisfied with the self-awareness of her classmates, so she went back to her seat. Because of yesterday's love letter incident, she did not immediately take out her textbook after putting down her bag. Instead, she bent down and looked at her drawer. Sure enough, there was another thing that did not belong to her. It was a piece of chocolate. Because Cheng Hua and Yiji loved to eat chocolate, Nian Nian also ate a lot with them, so she could be considered as knowledgeable. This type of chocolate was very common in the supermarket called Ferrero. Usually there were 3 in a box, and a box cost 9 yuan. For adults, 9 yuan was naturally nothing, not to mention that there was only one here, and it did not even have a complete packaging. But for elementary school students who did not have much pocket money, Ferrero's status was far above spicy sticks and potato chips. After all, he only bought one for 3 yuan. You could only eat 1 bite each. From this, it could be seen that this anonymous confessor's feelings for Nian Nian could be considered true love. The moment Nian Nian saw the chocolate, she could not help but hesitate for a moment. Then she took it out of the drawer. Regardless of who gave her this piece of chocolate, she would never eat it. Chapter 5:21. Speaking of which, Li Sanduo was actually quite interesting. He wasn't tall, about half a head shorter than Nian Nian, so he was one of the shortest in the class. Even so, this kid relied on his usual outstanding performance to get the teacher to arrange him in the last row, near the trash can at the back door. From this, it could be seen how mischievous this kid was in the teacher's eyes. Li Sanduo was indeed very mischievous. However, his mischievousness was very different from other children. Perhaps it was because of his more antisocial personality. Li Sanduo didn't have many friends in class, so when he had nothing to do, he would be alone in the last row, fiddling with something. Li Sanduo never played around with his classmates, nor did he like to bully others, but he had a very bad habit that the teacher disliked, and that was that he liked to interrupt during class. Just like a comedian, no matter what the teacher said on stage, he would always be the first to respond, and then make the whole class burst into laughter. In any case, he was a third-grade student, but he always pretended to be stupid in class, deliberately disrupting the class discipline, so the teacher naturally disliked him. They weren't afraid of students being mischievous, but they were afraid of students being unreasonable. Obviously, Li Sanduo belonged to the latter. It was unknown where this habit of his came from. After repeatedly failing to change, the teacher completely lost patience with him. One must know that this was the capital's affiliated primary school, and the teacher's shoulders carried a lot of pressure. The 3rd grade was a very important turning point. Li Sanduo didn't like to study, but he actually wanted to affect others' studies. How could the teacher tolerate this? Therefore, the teacher simply moved him to the last row so that he wouldn't affect the other students. This was a warning. Li Sanduo didn't necessarily understand, but his parents definitely understood. If he continued to mess around like this, it wouldn't be a matter of changing seats, but a matter of persuading him to transfer schools. A weirdo like Li Sanduo wasn't very common. Although Nian Nian didn't like him interrupting the teacher in class, that was another matter. Nian Nian didn't hate him because of that. Therefore, after hearing Li Sanduo's words, Nian Nian turned to look at him, and then began to think seriously. Economy is a virtue. Wasn't there a famous quote hanging on the classroom wall? Anyway, it would be a waste to throw it away. If Li Sanduo wanted to eat it, then let him have it. All right. Thank you, class leader. Li Sanduo seemed to know who put the chocolate in Nian Nian's drawer, so when he saw Nian Nian nod in agreement, his face showed a very happy smile. Oh yeah. Now he would have chocolate to eat every day. The result was just as Li Sanduo had expected. For the next week, Nian Nian would come to class every morning and find a piece of Ferrero chocolate in her drawer. Actually, she could have asked Big Cat to use its sense of smell to find this guy who had been secretly giving her gifts. However, considering that she didn't want to have any interaction with this person, Nian Nian pretended that nothing had happened. After receiving the chocolate every day, she would give it to Li Sanduo as soon as possible. 3 yuan worth of Ferrero chocolate. She gave it to him for a week. This was King True Love. Under the nourishment of these love chocolates, Lisandwa's complexion seemed to be a lot rosier than before. Even his thin and small figure showed signs of breaking out of the soil and growing at this moment. Lisandwa was very grateful for Nian generosity. Therefore, he now looked forward to tomorrow every day, hoping that he could eat such delicious chocolate tomorrow morning. But, unfortunately, Lisandwa's yearning for a happy life didn't last long before it completely came to an end. Early in the morning, after Nian came to class, she habitually looked down at her drawer, as usual. Because she didn't see any chocolate, she couldn't help but be stunned. It couldn't be helped, who asked her to develop a habit. Although she was a little surprised, Nian didn't take it to heart. It was better if no one disturbed her. Anyway, she would never fall in love with anyone early. Absolutely. Impossible. Without the chocolate, Nian naturally didn't need to deal with these things. Therefore, she subconsciously looked back, wanting to tell Lisandwa that she didn't receive any chocolate today, so that Lisandwa wouldn't have to wait there helplessly. However, after Nian turned back, she suddenly realized. Lisandwa was like a frosted eggplant today, hugging his head and curling up in his seat. Looking from afar, he gave off a delicate and pitiful feeling. According to Lisandwa's casual personality, even if he was scolded by the teacher, the expression on his face wouldn't change at all. Why did he seem like a different person today? Nian felt that it was a little strange. Out of concern for her classmate, after she put away her bag, she went straight to Lisandwa's side. Lisandwa, what's wrong with you? Hearing this, Lisandwa buried his head on the table and didn't move at all. Nian couldn't help but worry, so she reached out and gently pushed him twice. Are you sick? Do you want me to help you apply for leave? Under Nian's constant questioning, Lisandwa finally sat up from the table. However, he didn't immediately raise his head. Instead, it was as if someone had discovered a shameful secret. He impatiently waved his hand and said, I'm fine, don't bother me. What's wrong with you? Nian felt that his reaction was very strange, so she couldn't help but bend down so that her eyes were level with Lisandwa's head. Then, she saw the expression on his face. Lisandwa seemed to be crying? Nian's eyesight was very good, so she immediately saw something strange on Lisandwa's face. Lisandwa's right cheek was a little red, and she could faintly see that it was a slap mark, plus the tear stains at the corner of his eyes. Looking at this situation, it seemed like he was bullied. This was bad. The little guy exploded on the spot. You're crying? Who bullied you? Tell me. I'll tell the teacher. Not to mention that she was now the class monitor. Even if she didn't have any position, Nian would never allow bullying in her class. Because her father once said, we must firmly say no to bullying in school. Seeing that Lisandwa was like a coward who only knew how to lie on the table and cry, Nian was suddenly a little angry. Thus, she grabbed Lisandwa's arm, pulled him up from his seat, and shouted angrily, Lisandwa, stand up. Tell me who bullied you. I'll help you. Therefore, once there was bullying, it was usually a group of people who committed the crime together. Lisandwa's personality seemed casual and undisciplined. He would make the teacher angry in class whenever he had nothing to do. In fact, it was clear that he was a rather proud and solitary person. It was difficult for people like him to make friends. Thus, he could only use all kinds of outrageous behavior to gain more attention and cover up the loneliness in his heart. It was also because of this that Lisandwa would rather suffer silently than show his weak side in front of others. He didn't need anyone's help. Whether it was his parents, teachers, or classmates, the only one who could help him was himself. Thus, even if he was bullied today, Lisandwa didn't need any help. Because he wouldn't easily bow down and admit defeat. Nian couldn't figure out these complicated problems at the moment. Thus, her thoughts at the moment were very simple. That was to help Lisandwa get rid of the bullies. To achieve this goal, Nian purposely observed Lisandwa for a long time today. However, throughout the day, Lee Sanduo didn't show any signs of abnormality. During class, he would still interrupt the teacher's lecture. After class, he would quietly sit in his seat. During this period, he didn't interact with anyone. Thus, Nian couldn't tell who was bullying him. Without catching the culprit, Nian couldn't help even if she wanted to. Thus, she could only watch from the side. It wasn't easy to wait until school was over, but Lee Sanduo ran away with his school bag. This made Nian, who wanted to know more about the case, feel a little depressed. She had no choice but to complain to her father. As usual, Chunshi arrived at the school gate on time. When Nian came to his side, Chunshi picked her up from the ground. "Hey, what happened? Who made our little princess angry?" Since yesterday, when he learned that the little girl had begun to experience puppy love, Chunshi increased her security level. Thus, even if he was in the courtyard, he could check on the little girl's situation through the big cat. Thus, even without Nian saying anything, Chunshi already knew what she had experienced today. The little girl couldn't figure out Lee Sanduo's behavior, so she immediately told Chunshi the whole story. Seeing that the little girl was so warm-hearted, Chunshi naturally had to encourage her. Thus, after thinking for a while, he directly pointed out the key point. "Nian, since Lee Sanduo was already crying on the table when you saw him, that means he must have been bullied before you came to school. So if you want to prevent this kind of thing from happening again, you just have to wake up earlier in the future and be the first to go to class." Hearing this, the little girl's eyes suddenly lit up. What Daddy said made sense. No wonder she couldn't find the culprit no matter how hard she tried. They committed the crime in the morning. Then I have to wake up earlier tomorrow. Daddy, remember to call me. I want to protect Lee Sanduo. I can't let him be bullied by others. Seeing the little girl's indignant look, Chunshi couldn't help but shake his head and laugh. To Chunshi, the importance of this matter might not be as important as the supermarket discount. But to the little girl, this was an important matter that was enough to establish her values. Thus, not only did Chunshi not interfere, but he also followed the little girl's request and waited until dawn the next day to pull her out of bed. "Wake up, my little hero. There are still people waiting for you to save them." The little girl was still a little dazed at first. After hearing Chunshi's words, she immediately turned over and jumped out of bed as if she had been injected with chicken blood. "Daddy, let's go." How could the great Supreme Chen's daughter be the kind of person with bad values? Born between heaven and earth, she naturally had to be a chivalrous person and uphold justice. Chapter 5:23. With a firm resolve to uphold justice, the little fellow woke up early in the morning, which was a rare occurrence. When the father and daughter took a taxi to school, they arrived almost an hour earlier than usual. The capital-affiliated elementary school did not have a boarding school. Even though it was still early in the morning, the school gate was already bustling with activity. As a parent, Chunshi naturally could not instigate Nian to fight. Regardless of whether he could win or not, fighting was definitely wrong. Thus, when he saw the little girl's excited face, Chunshi smiled and reminded her. However, it was just a reminder. From the beginning to the end, Chunshi had no intention of interfering in this matter. As long as Nian's starting point was correct, no matter what she wanted to do, as a father, he would support her with both hands and feet. School bullying, in fact, was just school violence. Many children were weak and did not dare to tell their teachers and parents even if they were bullied. Thus, once bullying occurred, it would usually last for a long time. Those who had not experienced such an incident would find it difficult to understand the despair and helplessness of the victims. Fear, helplessness, and panic. It was like a nightmare that pressured them to the point of suffocation, but the teachers and parents did not notice at all. They did not even dare to look at the bully. As long as the bully appeared in front of them, they would lower their heads and become silent dogs that only knew how to wag their tails and beg for mercy. This kind of thing was unavoidable. It was like a steel wire that was tied up and gradually tightened around the victim's heart. They were in pain, but they could not make a sound. Lu Sun once said, If you do not explode in silence, you will perish in silence. There was a limit to everything. If Nian was willing to stand up and stop it, Qinshi would not let her stand aside and be a bystander. Dad, don't worry. I won't fight with them. I just want to stop them from bullying Li Sanduo. Adhering to the responsibility and awareness of being the class leader, the little girl waved goodbye to Qinshi in high spirits and then ran with big strides towards the teaching building. In the future, she would be the first to reach the classroom. Nianyan's classroom was on the 3rd floor. When she rushed to the classroom, there were already 2 or 3 students sitting in the classroom. She glanced at the back of the classroom and saw that Li Sanduo was not there yet. Thus, she returned to her seat and habitually looked at her drawer. Fortunately, there was no chocolate. It was still early, and even the teacher hadn't arrived at school yet, so after waiting for a while, Nian temporarily put these distracting thoughts behind her. She took out the textbook and began to review it seriously. In fact, she was not sure if Li Sanduo would be bullied today. However, it was best if it did not happen. The only thing she could do was to stand up and stop the bullying as soon as it happened again. Nian was to study. As time passed, there were more and more people in the classroom. Perhaps it was because Nian had come too early today, so the children who usually liked to chase and play at the back of the classroom didn't make a fuss today for the first time. Instead, they sat obediently in their seats as soon as they entered the classroom. Taking advantage of the fact that class had not started yet, many students started to chat in low voices. But at this moment, a piercing cat's cry suddenly came from outside the window. Meow, 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 meow. After hearing this familiar voice, Nian immediately looked out the window. She saw the big cat lying on a tree branch and staring at the little girl with its faintly glowing eyes. When Nian noticed it, the big cat gently wagged its tail and quietly jumped to another tree branch. Nian understood what it meant. So, without thinking, she stood up and quickly ran out of the classroom. The big cat moved around the tree while Nian chased after it in the corridor. When she ran into a classroom in the corner, the big cat finally stopped.
Meow.
There was a situation here. Nian looked up at the door sign and realized that she was in the music classroom. The door of the classroom was tightly shut. Nian subconsciously pressed her ear against the door and listened. She immediately heard some movement from within. There was someone inside. The big cat never did anything meaningless. Since it spoke, it meant that something must have happened. Hence, Nian didn't think too much about it and tried to twist the doorknob. The door was not locked. Nian pushed the door open and went in. At this moment, she suddenly realized. In this half-empty music classroom, there were 6 or 7 people standing there. Seeing this, Nian could not help but be stunned. She glanced at the people in front of her and saw a familiar figure. She could not help but ask, Li Sanduo? Why are you here?
There were 7 people in the classroom.
Li Sanduo was alone in the corner of the back door. The other 6 people were in a semicircle, surrounding him. Nian's sudden appearance seemed to have frightened these mischievous bullies. Hence, when they heard her voice, the children who were originally facing away from her all turned to look at her in unison. The situation was awkward. Nian and these people stared at each other. After a few seconds of silence, one of the people who seemed to be the leader reacted. He quickly whispered to his companions, "Let's go." This person was tall and muscular. He looked like he was at least a 6th grade student. Perhaps it was because he was older, but to Nian, this guy looked ferocious. She was stunned on the spot. There were no instruments in the music classroom, so the door was not locked.